can I not see you? You are now welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Speaker. The Financial Intelligence Centre Amendment Bill is one of the most important legislative weapons in the fight against corruption in South Africa. At the heart of the bill is the Gupta Clause, which ensures that domestic, prominent, influential persons and family members and known close associates of domestic, prominent, influential persons will be subject to enhanced scrutiny by financial institutions in South Africa, which includes obtaining senior management approval for establishing business relationships, taking reasonable measures to establish the source of wealth and source of funds of clients, and conducting enhanced ongoing monitoring of business relationships. And that is why Jimmy Manyi and his merry band of banker bashers emerged from under a rock to so strongly oppose the Financial Intelligence Centre Amendment Bill. Whatever the case, we now all know that President Jacob Zuma refused to use his presidential quill to sign the Financial Intelligence Centre Amendment Bill, and instead used Section 79(1) of the Constitution to refer it back to Parliament. We were told the President recognized that the purpose of the bill was important and pressing, but nevertheless thought that the provision dealing with warrantless searches, in particular Section 45B(1)(c), was likely to be unconstitutional. We took advice from senior counsel who advised that President Jacob Zuma was wrong. The bill was constitutional, but there would be no harm in tightening up provisions dealing with warrantless searches, which of course fueled speculation that the bill had been referred back with an ulterior motive, in this case to defang the Financial Intelligence Centre. Whatever the case, we have now considered the President's reservations and, on advice of senior counsel, have proposed amendments to the bill dealing with warrantless searches. We have made explicit what was implicit and believe that the President will now have no choice but to sign the Financial Intelligence Centre Amendment Bill into law and to enfang the Financial Intelligence Centre. Which of course brings me back to Jimmy Manyi and his band of banker bashers who are so strongly opposed to the Financial Intelligence Centre Amendment Bill and who have threatened to take it on review to the Constitutional Court. If anybody has any reservations that we are taking the right direction, consider that the person who led the charge against this bill was none other than Dr. Denisa Beloy, who was reportedly fired as a director of the ABSA Group and who was reportedly involved in one of the biggest and most cruel rip-offs of the poor in this country, namely the scandal involving Fidentia Asset Management and the Living Hands Trust. It was she who opposed this bill. We need to see Jimmy Manyi and his band of banker bashers for what they really are. Arsonists dressed as firefighters, lighting fires rather than fighting fires in South Africa. Whatever the case, we still have a long way to go, because even if we have the legislative weapons in place, we do not have the institutional weapons in place to fight corruption in South Africa. The Financial Intelligence Centre is a small institution comprising of about 213 employees and forced to operate on a small budget of about 289 million, and compelled to rely on other institutions such as the Hawks and the National Prosecuting Authority to bring cases to court in South Africa. What this means is that despite all the good work being done by the Financial Intelligence Centre, it is a pea shooter being used in a much bigger gunfight in South Africa, which means that as soon as we have the legislative weapons in place, we need to focus on getting the institutional weapons in place to fight corruption in South Africa. I thank you.
I see no other. Oh, Honorable Shivambu, of course.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Commander-in-Chief, there are certain things which perhaps we have to deal with differently when we take over power here in South Africa. One of those things is how cabinet relates to legislation. Now, this is what happened, that the National Treasury assured us throughout the deliberations on the FIC bill that cabinet has dealt with all the issues sufficiently in terms of the FIC bill. And cabinet is appointed by a president. They satisfy themselves that they can bring it as a bill to parliament for us to deliberate on that particular bill. It was brought here, and then we passed it to give it back to the president to sign it into law, into an act of parliament. And we did not change most of the issues. We just made sure that there's proper articulation of the critical issues that speak to how the FIC should assist in the war against financial crimes in South Africa. And in terms of the warrantless searches, we did not change anything. A president who approved a bill brings it to parliament, we take it to him back as it was in terms of those sections. And then he says it's unconstitutional. It is not compliant with the law, but he dealt with it first. He's the one who gave it to us as parliament, and then he brings it back for the second time. And what is the basis of him bringing it back? Is because the Guptas had said that that bill must not be signed into law. And opportunistically, when that bill was brought back specifically to deal with warrantless searches, then the Gupta groups was brought here to come and sing for their supper, led by Jimmy Manyi and unfortunately Solo Rastaba as well, because they've been co-opted into a Gupta band that seeks to protect family interest. And what were their issues? Their issues were two. They say in their submissions that bank accounts are being closed. And that is the issue that relates to the Guptas. And the second issue, they say that the ANC is going to be broke for the 2019 elections if we pass the FIC bill into a law as parliament. What they're basically suggesting is that the ANC is financed by money that is laundered. It's financed by money that is utilized for terrorist purposes, because this is what this act seeks to combat. And then the ANC Professionals Forum, led by a zombie of the Guptas called Jimmy Manyi, they come there and say that we represent the ANC professionals, and we can tell you that if you pass this bill, the ANC is going to be broke for the 2019 elections. And we're supposed to listen to such kind of nonsense, pure nonsense that has happened. Now we have expedited the process within the law, and we know that all the legal advices, and by the way, including the legal advice of the Black Business Council, was unanimous on the fact that we have to pass this law as is, because there is nothing that is unconstitutional about it. There was just grandstanding that had been happening around it. So now we must pass this legislation and take it back to the president, but we must agree that there must be a time frame within which legislation is signed when we take it to the president's desk, because in many instances, it is deliberately delayed without a focus in terms of when it must be made law. MPRDA spent more than 24 months on the desk of the president without being signed. It ultimately was brought back here in parliament. It was signed very late. So when the FIC bill goes back to the president, with the outgoing president's desk, in light of the incoming developments, he must immediately sign it into law so that we can have a proper instrument to fight financial crimes, money laundering, and all these things that happen in the global money movements. It's an important legislation to pass into law, but it's not the end of it. There are many other legislations that we must put into action to be able to fight financial crimes that define South Africa for a very long time. Thank you very much.
The Honorable Hlengwa.
Honorable members, one must thank the chairperson of the standing committee for his flexibility. In fact, this was just nothing but a waste of Parliament's time. It was really unnecessary for us to go on this merry-go-round and this roundabout, literally doing a 360. That bill should have been signed a long time ago. But of course, because it's a people's parliament, we must hear every view. But I think we must not abuse parliamentary process. We must not seek to circumvent due process for political expedience, because in the final analysis, the duty of the Standing Committee was to deal with one aspect, but you had people coming here waffling, going on and on and on about sweet nothings, which really had nothing to do with the matter at hand. Secondly, is that, as has already been articulated by previous honourable members, is that really there was nothing unconstitutional about this. What is clear is that there are desperate attempts to ensure that certain interests are protected in order for the people to continue abusing the finances of the country and ensuring that they line their pockets so that whenever there's a change of whatever will arise, that they are sorted. So I just want to say, honourable members, that these sponsored views of Jimmy Mani and Co., which he brought here to this parliament, are an indictment really on what we seek to achieve as a country. People want to protect this country, but they want to use parliament as a vehicle for us to abuse what needs to happen. Honourable Speaker, this legislation seeks to ensure that we tighten the loopholes around corruption, because ayikho into embi njengalobugebengu okudla kwey'mali zabantu eNingizimu Afrika. Abantu bayahlupheka ekuseni, emini, ntambama nasebusuku, kodwa khona iqumama nje nongesta abagwilika ngobusuku obodwa nje ngenxa yobugebengu. Ngakho-ke fanele impela senze sure ukuthi siyawuvala umnyango wey'gebengu, sivule umnyango wokuqinisekisa ukuthi iy'mali zabantu ziyaphepha, ngoba umsebenzi wethu la endlini ukuqinisekisa ukuthi abantu abangaxhashazwa abantu abasemagunyeni okuphatha njengoba kwenzeka. Iyona-ke lento oyibonile ngesikhathi iphalamende selihlezi baxoxa ngalo mthetho wesivivinyo ukuthi bekhona abantu ade bethunywa ukuthi abazovimba ngoba kufanele inkohlakalo eNingizimu Afrika iqhubeke. So with this legislation, we are further laying a foundation to say this corruption ends here and goes no further if we are serious about the fight against corruption. Okokugcina-ke mhlonishwa somlomo, yiko lokho sekushiya ukuthi cha, impela abantu akabayisebenzela ngendlela ethembeki imali bazokhankasa ngayo makuyinketho. Ngoba lokhu ukuthola izimali ngendlela eyisinxele bese kukhankaswa ngayo kuthiwa abantu bayawina kanti bakhankasa ngemali yobugebengu, siyawuvala nalowo mnyango lowo. Let us even the playing field to ensure that even the campaigning money that people are receiving, they get it in good faith. Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker.
The Honourable Shelembe.
Honourable Speaker, the National Freedom Party welcomes the report tabled here today by the Standing Committee on Finance. The amendments contained in the bill are aimed to remedy Section 45B of the Financial Intelligence Center Act, which the Constitutional Court has declared unconstitutional. In formulating the amendments, elements of vagueness that could give rise to legal uncertainty were correctly identified by the legal advisors to the President. The NFP believes that the further amendments addressed in the report tabled here today will remove any such uncertainties and pave the way for the bill to be enacted into law. Warrantless searches must at all times be approached with caution. The Criminal Procedure Act sets strict, clear, and unambiguous guidelines for searches without a correct obtained warrant. And there is no reason why the same standard should not be set in other pieces of legislation. At the core of the issue of searches without a warrant lies the concern of abuse of power, supported by concern for the dignity of people. The NFP believes that the proposed amendments to the bill and reported on adequately address these twin concerns of abuse of power and the dignity of people, which we support. We also commend the decision by the Standing Committee on Finance to engage the public to participate in its deliberations on the concerns of the President. Breaking with tradition and embracing innovation is a hallmark of growth in our view, contributes to growing a vibrant and proactive democracy. Although the nature of the President's concern related to a legal technical aspect of the figure and could have been dealt with behind the closed doors. The committee identified as imperative that public participation be encouraged. The National Freedom Party believes that the direct voice of the people must be given an opportunity at all times to be heard and taken into consideration at every level of the making of laws. The response of the committee to the President's referral is encouraging when we consider the widespread input that individuals and organizations made in submission. If such a positive trend can be adopted by all standing and portfolio committees in dealing with questions of constitutionality of legislation, then our democracy will be strengthened and it will be benefit of the country and all of our people as a whole. I thank you.
The Honorable Kwankwa.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. The United Democratic Movement supports the report of the Standing Committee on Finance on this matter. We think, however, it's very important that we bring a bit of context into some of the comments we made in the committee in November, where we're saying when we received the reservations of the President, we said that let us hear him out and listen to what he has to say, and then factor it into whatever amendments were possible. It was not in any way trying to endorse what the President of the country is trying to do, using legislations to undermine Parliament. I mean, the bill was with the President. It was passed in May and it only came to Parliament. It was only returned in Parliament in November for such an important piece of legislation, which has an effect, a negative effect, obviously, on the country. He was probably busy trying to move all the money that he was alleged to have kept in his bunker, probably. The issue is clear that all the deliberations, even if you read the report of the Standing Committee, you can see clearly that it was a complete waste of the committee's time. The matter was dealt with sufficiently right at the beginning when the bill was first sent to him, but he had to send it back to Parliament to delay it for political reasons. It's absolute nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, even if it's done by the President. He needs to know that, because they should be leading by example on these matters. You see, we see my upper UDM, this behavior, people must facilitate a process of looting of state resources. People, you have a leader that tries to facilitate the looting of state resources, people who appropriate public funds for private use, and we must say it's okay with that. Thank you very much.
Honorable Carter.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, COPE fully supports the adoption of a FICA amendment bill. COPE notes that the International Finance Action Task Team has given us 3 months' grace to enact the amendment bill before we are declared non-compliant with anti-money laundering, tax evasion, anti-terrorist financing standards, which would place us in the same category as North Korea and Iran. This bill was initially adopted by this House in May 2016. It took the President a whole 6 months to refer this important bill back to Parliament on what has proven to be frivolous and unfounded grounds. The Congress of the People commends the comprehensive and expeditious manner in which the Finance Portfolio Committee has attended to this matter. And the Congress of the People calls upon the President to act in the best interest of the country and not to further delay the enactment of this important anti-corruption and anti-criminal bill. Thank you.
The Honorable Swart.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, the ACDP will support this very important bill. It's time for the looters to be looted, the poachers poached, and the state capturers to be captured. So we see that one of the important clauses in this bill relates to domestic, prominent, influential persons who will be subject to enhanced scrutiny as set out in the bill. And Speaker, we are just making the cut-off date that was given by the Action Task Force, who indicated until the end of this month they're giving South Africa time to bring our regulatory framework into place, failing which we could have had severe consequences with foreign regulators and banks about our commitment to vigilant financial regulation. So now we've accepted this, and we trust the House, from all indications, will unanimously accept these amendments. However, Speaker, other speakers have referred to a very important aspect, and maybe we as Parliament need to do an audit of bills that we have passed, which are lying on the President's desk and need to be signed. Yes, he's fully entitled to send matters back to Parliament where he's concerned about the constitutionality. But how many of you remember the Protection of State Information Bill? That bill was controversial. It was passed in the end of 2000 and before the last election, and it is still sitting. The President referred that bill back to Parliament. We amended it, and it is now sitting on his desk. Now, whether you like that bill or not, it should not be allowed that the President sits with a bill once he's exercised his constitutional prerogative and then does not sign it into law, because that undermines the separation of power and Parliament. In that case, as in other cases, if he still has a concern, he's fully entitled to refer to the Constitutional Court. So thank you, Speaker. The ACDP will support this bill. I thank you.
My Honourable.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Let me say this up front. I prepared notes. I thought there were going to be substantive inputs that will be made to effect changes on the legislation. All that was there was huffing and puffing. But nevertheless, let me respond to some of the huffing and puffing that has been there, because the ANC's got a right to reply. Honourable Speaker, Section 45B of the Constitution, when it relates to warrantless searches, is very clear why there is a need for inspectors to go and do warrantless searches. It encourages an element of surprise. In all institutions, you have an element of surprise in an event that you suspect that there's been wrongdoing. But it does that within the prescripts of the law, meaning that the inspectors, before they even go there, they will submit to a judge a request to do a search. In an event that the process is slower, they will inform their supervisors, who will give them advice to continue with that search. Now, having looked and perused this clause where the President said it might be unconstitutional, we consulted senior counsels. For instance, we have a senior counsel gauntlet in our meeting. We are convinced as the Finance Committee that this piece of legislation will meet constitutional muster. And secondly, it is not correct for any member to stand here and suggest that the reason why we had to relook at the piece of legislation was on the basis that Mr. Mzwanele Manye had ulterior motives. Let's make it very clear in this institution. Any member of the public's got a right to be heard by the Parliament. This is the Parliament of the people. If by any chance, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody, because I'm one person who engaged Mr. Manye very vociferously. I said to him, he did not give us a legal opinion, therefore we don't consider his opinion. Don't stand here and pretend that we did not engage Mr. Manye. We said to him, give us a legal opinion, then we can listen to you. Instead, Mr. Manye said he will approach the Constitutional Court for review. And we said as the committee, that's fine. We believe this piece of legislation as it stands will meet constitutional muster. Secondly, South Africa belongs to the international community. It's a pity that we missed the deadline to submit our report on money laundering and anti-terrorism to FATF. At least we were given an opportunity to make a later submission, which we are going to do. And let's be honest, the President's got a lot to do on his plate. He doesn't only sign bills, he leads government. You cannot expect him to look only at one piece of legislation. Let's give him an opportunity. He had a view. We did not necessarily agree with the view, but let's give him an opportunity to relook at the legislation and sign it. I also see that you like one family. I thought you are the representative of the people. Why don't you speak about other people who spoke to this legislation? You did not even mention all those people, including Kazakh, who appeared before us, who had views to raise. Are you not representing them? It is clear who the DA represents. I think the voters realize that they are worried that their businesses will be searched. They don't want warrantless searches. And those warrantless searches will continue, whether you like it or not. And for the first time, Honorable Malema, Honorable Shivambu agrees with us. Please don't fight us. You are one on this one. I thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
I now recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Honourable Speaker, I move that the report be accepted by this House.
Are there any objections? Honourable Chief Whip, I am informed by the table that you are obliged to read the entire motion.
I move that the report of the Standing Committee on Finance thereon and the President's reservations on constitutionality of bill as submitted to him is considered. I move that the report be adopted and that the bill be passed by this House.
Are there any objections? No objections agreed to. The bill will be sent to the President for assent. The Secretary will read the second order.
Consideration of request for approval by Parliament of South Africa's protocol of accession to the agreement establishing the Advisory Center on World Trade Organization law in terms of Section 2312 of Constitution.
Are there any objections to the approval of the South African's protocol of accession to the agreement establishing the Advisory Center on World Trade Organization law as it appears on the order paper? Honourable members, we did not receive information that there was a request, but we hereby allow Honourable John Fabs, who leads this committee, that in fact participates on our behalf at the World Trade Organization. Please come through, Honourable Fabs.
My apologies, Honourable Speaker. Yes, this particular protocol of accession to the agreement establishing the Advisory Centre on the World Trade Organization law will be of particular value to South Africa. One of the ways in which South Africa will benefit from this is being able to access legal capacity at a much lower cost, a reduced rate, to take full advantages of the benefits offered by the World Trade Organization. In this particular tight global economy, it is of great importance that we are able to finance these operations within our budget. And the cost of doing so overseas is a tremendous drain on our budget that could be used in other areas. The ACW assists countries in the WTO dispute settlement proceedings at the discounted rates. The financial implications for the ACW for joining it are far, far lower than if we had to foot the bill ourselves in this regard. So this was discussed, and we do believe that South Africa can effectively use its policy space with this support that we'll be getting under this legal support process. So the committee looked at this, accepted it, and recommends that the House adopts this in the interests of ensuring that any disputes we may encounter or clarifications we can seek are within our financial capacity as a sovereign country. So the ANC, alongside all the other parties, supports the secession. I thank you.
The honourable member of the DA.
Thank you, Speaker. The Democratic Alliance supports the recommendation. However, it's important that we deal with another acronym like the WTO, and that is RET, Radical Economic Transformation. For it is this term and what is being done under RET that will severely damage our standing in forums like the WTO. Albert Einstein famously said, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results." It was with much interest and even bated breaths that President Jacob Zuma proudly announced to South Africans in his State of the Nation that his government would be embarking upon radical economic transformation. One can only then wonder what his government has been doing for the last 22 years and why only now they bring RET to the fore. For too long, the ANC and President Zuma have governed like they have been in opposition, unwilling to change economic environment for small businesses and entrepreneurs in order for them to make a living and contribute to our economy. All manner of excuses have been rolled out, from various challenges to the slowdown in economic growth, the Minister Davies' favourite excuse, electricity blackouts under the watch of the ANC, and this year's catchphrase, which the Honourable Malefi will know quite well, white monopoly capital. The truth is that the ANC has the ability and, importantly, the majority to write policies, laws and bylaws that make it easier for businesses to grow. Yet they have failed on every score. What they have done, rather, is make it incredibly difficult for anyone outside of the Zupta circle to make a decent living. From cumbersome regulations, to lack of access to capital for black entrepreneurs, to government departments paying suppliers late, the ANC has become the very enemy to anyone with or starting a business. The ANC and President Zuma think by putting the word radical in front of economic transformation, this will somehow make it more radical. I believe that the newfound commitment for radical economic transformation is actually a response to pressure from the state-captured faction of the ANC. RET is the perfect excuse to change procurement rules and the BEE codes of good practice under the guise of speeding up transformation, which in fact will allow for more tenders for cronies and well-connected friends. RET is actually a plan for radical corruption. In the eThekwini municipality, and under the framework of accelerating transformation, subcontractors or service providers will be selected from the wards where this service is to be undertaken. This will be nothing more than an opportunity for the ANC to further extend patronage. One can only imagine the ANC local branch executive selecting who those subcontractors will be, including MK veterans and ANC Youth League members. It is important to see this for what it is, nothing but legalized corruption and patronage, all under the philosophy of being radical. The ANC government has been on the same road of self-enrichment, corruption, overseeing increasing unemployment, and continued neglect of job-crushing policies with business red tape, and now think by becoming radical, they can float the sinking ship of their government. The truth is that President Zuma and his cohort of ministers will keep doing the same things over and over and over, unable to change because the vested interests in continuing the system of patronage will not allow it to end. Speaker, in 2017, it seems that the status quo is set to remain. Lutuli House and Tynhuys, firmly an asylum for the insane, trying desperately to do the same thing with different results, just under a new radical name. I thank you.
The Honourable Gadi.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, South Africa and the world. Of course, we are addressing the world here. The economic freedom fighters rejects this request by the executive to accede to the protocol on the World Trade Organization law offices, advisory offices. We reject this precisely because we no longer trust the ruling party. You come here and request approval to be part of international instruments. Just in the past week or two, the North Gauteng High Court called you into order because you didn't come here to ask for approval to withdraw from the ICC. We don't know whether you will withdraw from this World Trade Organization without having come here to ask for approval to withdraw. But now we have come here to ask for approval to sign the international instrument. Well, notwithstanding that, objectively so, we disagree with this protocol because it is going to kill our local industry. There is a municipality in Likwa, Madam Speaker. It can only pay salaries once the chicken poultry there at Standerton has paid its rates and taxes. With this World Trade Organization's conduct, it is known for killing local industries. And if we do actually accede to these international instruments, they are coming here to advise us on how much more we should kill our own local industries. It started with the textile, now it is with the poultry. So you want us to be complicit on such unleashing of sufferings to our people. There is a loss of jobs in South Africa, in fact, from load shedding to job shedding because of policies that are premised on the ideology of the international monopoly capital, of which the World Trade Organization actually is championing throughout the world, and more so on developing countries. There's nothing positive about the Advisory Center on World Trade Law, and it still gives powers to its director to make the final decision on what claims to bring based on the policy of the center than the policy of the sovereign states who are members to that organization. Such influence by the World Trade Organization on member states, on their sovereignty and policies which should inform its approach on issues of trade internationally, actually will kill the economy of the country. It is on this basis and premises, Madam Speaker, South Africa and the world, that we reject this international instrument. We thank you.
The Honorable Oosthuizen.
Honourable Speaker, the Advisory Centre, with its experience and knowledge of trade dispute settlement systems, represents a significant advantage and can offer opportunities to developing countries like South Africa. Still, the challenge of lack of expertise in World Trade Organization law and international trade law, and the capacity to organize information concerning trade barriers, as well as the ability to challenge them, hindered most small and developing economies. Add this to the cost factor of international trade legal systems and the weak remedies, and then dispute settlement sometimes does not really justify the time and money. ACWL, the Advisory Center of World Trade Organization law, in its mandate to ensure that developing and least developed countries with its financial and human constraints can also participate fully in the World Trade Organization legal system, is a noble goal. But there's also challenges like language and the enormous costs involved. For us to participate meaningfully in the World Trade Organization dispute settlement system, we need to increase institutional capacity and coordination of trade policy. We will need to include private sector and civil society representatives. Additionally, as a founding member of the World Trade Organization, South Africa must fulfill all obligations assumed by it under the World Trade Organization agreements. The World Trade Organization agreements form a package, and members cannot selectively pick agreements to join or implement. Therefore, introducing a domestic measure limiting foreign participation in the private security industry would institute a clear violation of South Africa's commitment under GATT's General Agreement of Trade and Service. Is South Africa following a closed-door policy, or is it open for business, as government would have us believe? Deluding the world and the World Trade Organization that the economy is more open than it is alarming and raises questions about a protocol agreement and the integrity of our government. The IFP supports the approval for the protocol. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'd like to correct myself, Honorable Esterhazen. I'm very sorry for calling you Oosthuizen. Honorable Kubisa.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The international political landscape today is a stark reflection of a collective global history steeped in colonialism, exploitation, and deep-rooted inequality, which has become a structural feature of the modern international order. It is within this context, Chairperson, Madam Speaker, which the National Freedom Party welcomes the report of the Portfolio Committee on Trade and Industry tabled here today. We are asked to ratify today is an agreement that will lead to the establishment of an advisory center on World Trade Organization laws. In a sense, we are asked to agree to the founding document or constitution of an international center which has as its aim the leveling of the field for settling trade-related disputes. The formation of the World Trade Organization gave rise to a complex international legal system with elaborate procedures for settling trade disputes, and a need was identified to address the issue of access to resources to resolve international trade disputes. Basically, there is a need to ensure that all members of the World Trade Organization have equal access to the dispute resolution procedure, regardless of whether a member state can afford the expertise and advice to engage successfully or not. We have a similar mechanism here in South Africa in the form of a legal aid that is assisting indigenous people to access justice. In a similar fashion, that advisory center will assist developing countries with an economy in transit, and less developed countries to access the World Trade Organization dispute resolution process. The National Freedom Party is in favor of approving the protocol, as we can identify with the ethos, the aims and objectives of the advisory center. In particular, the National Freedom Party is impressed with the fairness of linking the dues and the benefits of member states on a sliding scale to the relative strength of each country's economy. South Africa is classified as an upper middle income country, and our contribution to the endowment fund that will kickstart the advisory center amounts to 1.3 million. Finally, Madam Speaker, by approving the protocol, we are contributing to a source that will be of greater benefit to less developing countries with a substantially weaker economy than ours. Proportionally, these countries are less likely to engage in successful international trade dispute resolution than we are without external support. And if our approval of the protocol can go some way in assisting those less fortunate than us, then the act of giving our support is politically, socially, and economically justified and indeed desirable. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable Koornhof.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We welcome the support by the various political parties in terms of this protocol. This is a positive improvement and long overdue. We are members of the World Trade Organization, and it's therefore important that South Africa participate. We shall now have the benefit of the advisory center of legal resources, and we will be able to protect our agreements and this protocol. It is positive. It's unfortunately that the EFF was trying to play another matter. They should have supported this. This is in the benefit of South Africa and in the benefit of the poor. The ANC will support this, as eloquently explained by our chairperson.
Honourable members, given that there are objections, there is an objection from the EFF to the approval of the South Africa's protocol of accession to the agreement establishing the Advisory Center on the World Trade Organization law as it appears on the order paper, I will have to put the question. I now put the question. Those in favor will say aye. And those against, no. It's obvious that the ayes have it. And
Madam Speaker,
yes, Honorable Gadi.
may you please note and record the objection of the Economic Freedom Fighters?
The objections of the EFF will be noted and recorded, and therefore this motion has been agreed to. The next item on the order paper is a motion in the name of the Honorable N.F. Shibambu. Honorable members, I've been informed that the Honorable J.S. Malema will take charge of the motion in terms of Assembly Rule 93. The Honorable Malema.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, and the leadership of the EFF. This is a motion that seeks to unite black people in South Africa. And ordinarily, if leadership was provided, we shouldn't be having this debate, because the land should have been returned into the hands of the rightful owners. We all know that the Dutch gangsters arrived here and took our land by force. And the struggle has since been about the return of the land into the hands of rightful owners. Yet those who went to negotiate on behalf of our people during the negotiations sold out this fundamental principle which constituted the struggle against colonialism. So those who claim to be radical enough and who want radical change today should actually be in the forefront of agreeing that this constitution must be changed to make it possible for our people to own the land. It can't be correct that the less than 10% of the population owns almost more than 75% of the land. And those people who own the land happen to be, in an acceptable language, private people like individuals, trusts, and companies. But when you search deep as to who are these people, these are white people who are still owning our land. We remain a conquered nation, even when we claim to have democracy. We remain a conquered nation because white monopoly capital still owns the means of production, and at the center of that is the land question. The dominance of white people, it cannot go away, particularly white supremacy, for as long as land is not returned into the hands of the people. We are the only country where we say revolution has taken place, yet those who were oppressing us have not lost anything after the revolution. We remain as we were even before 1994. So we are saying that black people, all of us, we need to unite and amend the constitution so that we can expropriate land without compensation. There is no white person who will understand that clarion call, because they don't know the pain of being landless. Only those who have gone through a passage of being landless will appreciate where we come from on the issue of the land. The issue of the land cannot be a campaigning issue. The issue of the land cannot be a rhetorical question. The issue of the land should be an issue of commitment. Honorable members, we have taken an oath here. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying we are loyal to the land. But how can we be loyal to the land which is in the hands of private individuals? We must be loyal to the land that belongs to us.
Majority of our people say South Africa belongs to them, yet they do not have proof to show that indeed South Africa belongs to them, because many of them do not even know how a title deed looks like. Many generations died without even knowing how a title deed looks like. It is only through the expropriation of land without compensation that our people will be the rightful owners of this country. We cannot keep on saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, yet we have nothing to show. Today, the ANC should come with the EFF. There is 6% available. We give it to you without no condition to amend the constitution and take the land. If you don't agree with us today, it means you are disagreeing with Honorable Ayanda Dlodlo. If we don't agree with us today, it means you don't agree with your outgoing president on the issue of expropriation of land without compensation, even the Minister of Land. This is a matter that can unite black people. This is a matter that all of us should stand together and isolate white monopoly capital. This is a matter that can say to us, this is a genuine call which we as black people can identify with. So the ANC, 6% shiona, relefayona, Arjel lefase relimeng, Arjel lefase rage di feme, Arjel lefase refe batho ba rena ba be le magae, ba be le a place to call home. Honorable Nzimande, we have already started taking the land. If you vote against this, it's a waste of time. We are already giving our people the land, and we are not ashamed of that. People of South Africa, where you see a beautiful land, take it, it belongs to you.
Honorable Ngwenya Mabila.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable members, we know the history of the land dispossession. We also know how are we going to address that. We are not going to be told what to do. We are not in alliance with anyone else. We are a ruling government. We agree as the ANC that the land reform process is slow. That is why various programs have been initiated to address the land question. But we disagree with the motion tabled by Honorable Shivambu. We totally reject it. That we amend Section 25, subsection 1, in fact, is subsection 2 of the Constitution. Expropriation of land should be done for public purpose and public interest, not for EFF purpose and EFF interest. Secondly, expropriation without compensation is unconstitutional. We need to respect and uphold the Constitution as citizens of this country, and moreover, as members of this House. Expropriation must be subject to just and equitable compensation, as indicated in Section 25, subsection 2B of the Constitution, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which have been agreed to by those affected or decided or approved by the court. We still believe that if there is dispute between parties, our courts will play a role in mediating. Expropriation with compensation takes into account the current use of land, the history of acquisition, the market value of property, the extent of the state investment and subsidy in the acquisition and beneficial capital improvement of property. We don't agree with the establishment of the ad hoc committee in terms of Rule 253, 1A and 3 to address the loopholes of the Constitution. But we believe that the Constitution is the supreme law of the country, therefore it cannot be reviewed by the ad hoc committee. As you have mentioned, Honorable Shivambu, that Parliament has a constitutional review committee. It is therefore the responsibility of that committee to review the Constitution, not the ad hoc committee to review the Constitution. and the constitution will be reviewed when it is necessary. Therefore, the issue of the ad hoc committee falls off. The issue of the intensive public consultation is a constitutional matter. No question about it. As Section 59 of the Constitution clearly indicates that Parliament must involve public in all the legislative processes. That is why we respect the decision of courts if they decide that no sufficient public participation was done, such as the Expropriation Amendment Bill and the Restitution of Land Rights Amendment Bill, to mention the few. Therefore, it is our responsibility to restart the process and ensure that there's intense public participation. The ANC Ready to Govern document has 4 pillars. One of them is to overcome the legacy of inequality and injustice created by colonialism and apartheid in a swift, progressive, and principled way. That is what the ANC government is doing, guided by its policies, not by EFF. Honorable Speaker, the 53rd National Conference of the ANC in 2012 confirmed the resolution taken in the 52nd Conference of 2007 on rural development, agrarian change, and land reform. Furthermore, the 53rd National Conference of the ANC adopted the NDP, which sets out the country vision for the period up to 2030. To address the land issue and the land ownership, the following legislations were enacted: the upgrading of the Land Tenure Right Act, number 112 of 1991, the provision of the Land and Assistance Act, number 125 of 1993, the Communal Property Association Act, number 28 of 1996, the Labor Tenants Act, number 3 of 1996. We agree that the implementation of this act is very slow. We need to do more. The Restitution of the Land Rights Act number 22 of 1994 was passed, which makes provision for the restitution of the rights of land to persons or communities dispose of such rights after 19 June 1913, as the result of the past racial discrimination laws and practices. To administer this act, the Commission on the Land Restitution of Land Rights and the Land Claims Court was established. This act indicates that the minister is authorized to purchase, to acquire in any other manner, or expropriate land or rights in land for the purpose of restitution. Restitution process is slow due to many reasons, such as the high prices of land, the conflicts amongst beneficiaries, the court cases taking long to be concluded, and some beneficiaries opt for financial compensation instead of land, which undermines the land question. We acknowledge that the land reform is very slow, but it must be done within the prescripts of the law. The willing seller, willing buyer principle resulted in the state paying inflated prices for land, which contributed to the delay of the land reform process. Even if that was the case, we need to address this matter soberly. The Commission has settled 79,280 land claims as at 31st January 2017 for 1 million beneficiaries and 408,000 households, which accounts to 3.3 million hectares. From 1994, the restitution has spent more than 36.5 billion, of which 11 billion was for financial compensation. There are 6,988 claims outstanding, which were lodged by December 1998. But there are plans in place to deal with this and fast-track the restitution process. The high prices charged by sellers, which will be addressed by the Office of the Valuer General, which has been established in terms of the Property Valuation Act number 17 of 2014, to ensure that government pays just and equitable compensation. Let's give the Valuer General time to do his work, and we'll see the difference with regards to the land price. Honorable Speaker, the department is currently busy with a consultation with regards to the exceptional policy which will address those people whose land has been taken before 19 June 1913, which will include the Khoi and the Sen, the heritage sites, and the historical landmarks. As decided by the 53rd Conference of the ANC, that there be exceptions to the 1913 cut-off date. The strengthening of the relative rights of people working the land was proclaimed by the minister in 2014. It's also one way of addressing skewed land ownership. It has started, it will be extended to other areas. The department is busy drafting policy on the regulations of land holding to ensure that South African-owned land and foreigners must be leased the land. In Polokwane, the ANC reaffirmed that the comprehensive land audit be done. The phase 1 was completed. The department is in the process of finalizing phase 2 of the land audit to ensure that equitable land allocation and use across race, gender, and class is realized. The establishment of the institutions such as the Land Rights Management Committees and the Land Rights Management Board will assist in involving the local people in the regulations of the land use and distribution when the ESTA Amendment Bill is being passed. The department has been able to scale up recap and comprehensive agricultural support by providing farming implements, seeds, livestock, irrigation infrastructure. The recap has improved the economic condition of other beneficiaries, such as the Ravela beneficiaries, the Marinda, and the others. Currently, 1,496 farms are under recap since 2009, which constitute 421,846 million hectares, amounting to 4 billion rand. Some projects are productive, others are still experiencing challenges. As South Africans, we have to respect and uphold the Constitution. It is therefore amazing if other members of parliament who are lawmakers influencing people to grab land instead of educating and advising them. We are honorable members. Let's behave as such, not as horrible members. Expropriation without compensation is unconstitutional. As the ANC, we agreed that the land reform process is slow. It needs to be accelerated. We don't support this motion. We still believe that just an equitable compensation is a solution, like in any other African countries' law, such as Lesotho, Zambia, Malawi, and Namibia. Therefore, the motion must fall. I thank you.
The Honorable Lottery.
Speaker, die Menseregte Handves is die hoeksteen van demokrasie in Suid-Afrika, wat die regte van almal verseker en wat die demokratiese waardes van menswaardigheid, gelykheid en vryheid bevestig. Geen wysiging van enige artikel van die grondwet mag hierdie basiese waardes skend nie. Die grondwet het ook 'n dubbele rol, deur aan die een kant hierdie waardes te beskerm en aan die ander kant te verseker dat onregte van die verlede aangespreek word. Veral grondonteiening wat tot onmeetbare sosiale en ekonomiese verwoesting gelei het. Die vraag voor ons vandag is of artikel 25 in die weg staan van grondhervorming. Sal grondhervorming inderdaad versnel word deur vir onteiening sonder vergoeding voorsiening te maak? Wat sal die gevolg wees as vergoeding verwyder word? Let us look specifically at what Section 25 allows. It is important to note that Section 25 does not guarantee property rights, but merely protects it from arbitrary state interference. Deprivation that is not arbitrary is permissible. Unlike what is popularly believed, the property clause does not carry the phrase willing buyer, willing seller. This is often quoted as the reason for lack of land reform, but the Constitution does not lay down that standard. It includes market value as only one factor amongst 5 that must be taken into consideration. The property clause allows for the court to determine the compensation, and the only requirement is that it must be just and equitable in line with the guiding principles of the Constitution. The Constitutional Court judgment in the Haffajee case made it clear that the state may expropriate property even when the seller is refusing to accept a reasonable offer, or even before compensation has been determined. Thus, compensation remains a requirement for expropriation, but not a prerequisite. Therefore, it cannot be seen as a stumbling block. The dispossession of land where people lost their ownership has caused tremendous pain and a loss of dignity. Security of property ownership, however, provides the opportunity of living a life of dignity beyond mere existence. It protects the poor against a predatory state. Expropriation without compensation as a constitutional principle will create insecurity, uncertainty of property ownership for decades to come. it can indeed again make the kind of dispossession experienced during apartheid a possibility. It is clear that it is not Section 25 that is standing in the way of land reform. It is, in fact, enabling it, ordering it. What stands in the way is government's implementation of it. Wanneer daar 'n oproep is om onteiening sonder vergoeding, wat teen die basiese waardes en regte, spesifiek eiendomsregte van die grondwet gaan, moet ons besin of ons inderdaad gehoor en uitvoering sal gee aan die tipe samelewing soos voorsien in die grondwet. Die DA is ten gunste van eiendomsregte vir die armstes van ons samelewing. En om vergoeding uit te haal, dryf lynreg in teen die DA se visie van 'n vrye en regverdige geleentheidssamelewing vir almal van ons.
The Honourable Mente. Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, last Friday, Mr. Zuma, the outgoing president of South Africa, spoke in Pretoria and said, how are we going to achieve all the goals mentioned in the State of the Nation address and all the laws and policies that we are busy amending to enable faster land reform, including land expropriation without compensation as provided for in the Constitution? Today you distort that. While debating the State of the Nation address, Mr. Gugu Nkwinti, seated here, said there is a need to have a law that's making it possible for the state to expropriate the land without compensating illegitimate land owners. And then the Deputy Minister, Ms. Ayanda Dlodlo, emphasized that we must take back the stolen land without paying those who claim to it as an outcome of historical injustices. The ruling party has been speaking about radical economic transformation, and we stand here as the EFF to proclaim that radical economic transformation without expropriation of land, without compensation, is hot air. We are here as the EFF to put a practical proposal to cogently address the over 350-year historical injustice of land and theft and alienation perpetrated by a minority of white settlers against African people in the country, and dispel the notion by the Premier of the Western Cape, Helen Zille, that 45% by now belongs to the black people. That's not true. It's only the mere 30%. Only 8% of land has been bought by billions of rands so far, and it will take 100 years to at least buy 30% of the land. Central to the post-1994 land reform agenda is Section 25 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which provides for the three-tier land reform program. However, in the same constitution is the controversial property clause, Section 25(1), which reads, no one may be deprived of the property except in terms of the law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of land or property. Section 25(2) of the Constitution does provide for the expropriation of land for both public purpose and in the public interest, but it states clearly that such expropriation must be subjected to compensation. Section 25(3) enjoins the states to pay what it calls just and equitable compensation, to taking into account a number of factors, including the history of how the land was acquired and the market value of the land. Therefore, Section 25 of the Constitution provides two irreconcilable imperatives. First, it provides for redress for historical injustices through land reform. But secondly, it also entrenches the principle of protection of private property rights, which is inimical to comprehensive land reform. Comprehensive land reform would be impossible to attain within the current constitutional framework that protects intergenerational dispossession and imposes a framework of the protection of private property rights acquired through a long process of plunder.
The resolution of this question is directly linked to the decolonization of our country and about overcoming the colonial tribal divisions, apartheid, artificial identities, and end to white supremacy. The resolution of the land question is basically about creating new society based on values, equality, and democracy for all. Therefore, that is why today we are offering you our 6% so that we can
Honourable
deal
Member,
with the Section 25
your time
of the
has now
Constitution.
expired. Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Simang.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair. The IFP strongly supports the call for government to accelerate the allocation of land to the millions of landless Africans. The IFP goes further to emphasize that the government should prioritize such redistribution to those who need the land most, the homeless people in our towns and cities. The government was rightly applauded in 1994 when it repealed all legislation constraining African people's movement to urban areas. The repeal ushered in unprecedented influx of Africans to our towns and cities. This has made South Africa the most urbanized country in Africa, with 62% of South Africans becoming urbanized. The government must have anticipated this and developed strategies to accommodate this influx, yet nothing was done. Many of these nationals have formed homeless people's organizations to bring their plight to the attention of authorities, but to no avail. Many still have resorted to land grabbing, where they built their squatter camps. We are advised against using the term squatter camps in favor of more glorious terms such as informal settlements. Yet there is nothing glorious about squatter camps. You call them by any other name, they remain squatter camps. The government encouraged these people to venture to city life, but has failed to generate jobs for them. In the squatter camps, the cities cannot even offer them basic services. They are regarded as temporary sojourners, yet there is no development in rural areas to stem the tide of urbanization or attract them to return back to the rural areas. We are talking here about people who live in squalid conditions, many of whom are not only homeless but also poor and unemployed. They are living in areas which are not fit for the human habitation. They live on sinkholes where their shacks can collapse at any moment. We are talking about people who build on riverbanks, such as the Jukskei in Johannesburg, which when in flood washes away their homes, taking all their property with and even taking lives. What is ironic about residential land in our cities is that it is state-owned. Municipalities do not need to negotiate with willing sellers to access it. Turning now to the 30% farming land that was promised to the black people, the IFP agrees that progress has been very slow and therefore support expropriation.
Honourable Member, your time is now expired.
With the payment of fair compensation. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair. Honourable members in the House and distinguished guests in the gallery. Once again, we are called to deliberate on the challenges faced by our people in the country who were in the most inhumane manner removed and dispossessed from their land. Honourable House Chair, this pain and suffering endured by our people under the apartheid regime, and let me reiterate, Honourable Chairperson, that apartheid regime was not only made up of white South Africans, but there were many others of different races who colluded with the apartheid regime, who conducted their affairs in a divide and rule policy. Honorable Chairperson, what is very clear and we must agree with is that the principle of the willing buyer and willing seller has failed. What we must agree with is that the pace with which we are addressing the challenges in the restitution of land is not good enough. What we must admit is those that are holding onto the land, which we all know is a very small percentage of people owning about 70 or more than 70% of the land, cannot be allowed and tolerated any longer. Honorable Chairperson, another very important point is when this land was taken away from our people, we must not forget that prime land was taken away from our people, and then they were sent away to go and live in the rural areas and in the outskirts, where there were no amenities, there were no facilities whatsoever. So when we are now going to provide land to these people, we must take that into consideration. No amount of financial contribution or compensation is good enough. What we need to do and must do is provide each and every South African family in South Africa with land which is their right, which belongs to them. The land belongs to everyone who live in it. And that is why, with the statement that we want radical economic transformation, the very first step in the country would be to ensure that every South African has their dignity and identity, which must start from that land. We do agree with the expropriation since the willing buyer, willing seller has failed. Compensation, yes. Again, one needs to address what they took, where that land existed, the value of it at that stage, and what they're going to get paid. So compensation must now not necessarily be based on prime land that they might be owning right now. Honorable Chairperson, dispossession continues if you take the area of, or right now in Woodstock where people are being removed and yet we're doing nothing about it. Judge Isa Musa, who died recently, that was on Sunday, was one of the victims who was moved and removed
Honourable Member,
from District
your time
6.
is now
So
expired.
let us expedite and accelerate this process of restitution. Thank you, Chair.
The next speaker is the Honourable Fultane.
I shall not trumpet it, I will trumpet. The United Democratic Movement supports the motion. The ruthless exploitation of the black people in their country, the seizure of their land, and the enforced harnessing of the labor leaves the indigenous citizens with only the voting power, but nothing to effect fundamental change in their daily lives. They are dehumanized with no security and no social and economic worth in their motherland. Food and shelter are no longer freely shared amongst the people because they don't own land to build shelter and produce food on. The whole point of the freedom struggle was the repossession by African people of all its properties from the hands of the colonizers who had captured it through the barrel of the gun. The early freedom songs about the land such as Tina Sizwe Simnyama Sikhalela Izwe Lethu elathathwa ngabamhlophe mabawuyeke umhlaba wethu. Chief Makoma once told a colonial soldier, Colonel Wade, that, quote, we Africans are to have land again. It was bequeathed to us by our ancestors to hold, nurture, and make it productive for their progeny. You came out of the sea to our land. Like a serpent, you emerged from the water. Besides, you had no tongue to speak to us. We waited to know why you had come. Instead, we heard you were settling and taking possession of our land. He continued, but this is our land. You made us vanish, not exist. Our land is us. We are our land. From the sea you had no cattle. Now you have many cows and sheep. War you made to dispossess us. Blood you spilled to take even more land. We cannot give up. We cannot rest without our land. We cannot. At the heart of the land question in South Africa is how to reverse the dire effects of the diabolical Native Land Act, which was intended to legalize land robbery, starting with the settler colonization. It is about a large-scale redistribution of land to contribute to the transformation of the economy and the eradication of poverty, both in rural and urban areas. The current provisions of Section 25(7) of the Constitution confines the period of dispossession to 19th June 1913. As illustrated above, the Africans were already moving towards the 3rd century. The dispossession of Africans was already moving towards the 3rd century at the time of the 1913 Land Act. Many wars of resistance were fought. To the ANC, the current owners of the land inflate prices such that government intentions to acquire it are impossible. I was speaking to people only yesterday, and they say, no, there are no sales of farms going on anymore because they keep on shooting up the prices. Our constitution does allow for the amendment of itself. So it's not unconstitutional, ANC, to push for this. Don't mislead people, not deliberately. In this regard, our constitution must provide for the return of land, and if needs be, compensate only for the improvements made on the land, but not to buy back our own land. Speaker, this means the program to return land to the tillers must be swift, radical, and abroach the interests of the minority landowners. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Groenewald.
Agbare voorsitter, hierdie debat is 'n baie belangrike debat en die mense en die grondeienaars van Suid-Afrika moet mooi luister. Daar is 'n gedagte dat as daar gepraat word van grond en grondonteiening, dan verwys dit net na boere en landbougrond. As dit gaan oor onteiening, gaan dit oor elke eienaar van grond. Of jy nou 'n huis besit in 'n dorp, of in 'n stad, of 'n plaas, raak dit jou. En as daar gesê word dat daar onteiening sonder vergoeding moet wees, dan moet jy weet dat jou huis in die dorp of in die stad of jou plaas is dan ter sprake. Honourable Chair, it is really a pity that the white people are always made the scapegoat when it comes to land reform. And let me put it quite clear. The rightful owners of property and land in South Africa are those people who work hard and paid for the land and who's got a title deed at the title deeds office. Those are the rightful owners of land. And you will not be able to just come and take it. That is not possible. South Africa is a constitutional democracy. And any land will have to go through a constitutional process if you want to be expropriated. But please, stop blaming the white people for everything that goes wrong. It is the incompetencies of the governing party that cannot ensure that there's enough land expropriation or land reform in South Africa. More than 5% of all land ends up in the open market annually.
Honourable members.
Some of those properties, especially some farms, are below market value because of the drought. So the government is in such a good position that they can obtain thousands and millions of hectares of land below market price. Why don't you do that? Why do you use the rhetoric of it's because of the white people? And I'm very worried that Honourable Zuma said that they will do expropriation without compensation. At least it seems that the honourable members of the ANC in Parliament at least differs from him. I say it again. The owners of the land are the people who worked for it, they paid for them, and they do not apologize for that.
Order, honourable members. Order. Order, honourable members. The next speaker is the Honourable Lakota. Order, honorable members.
Thank you, Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. My dear friends and colleagues, I think it's important that we must remind each other today in this debate that a lot of research and thought went into the drafting of the constitutional clause that is there. Let's remind each other that before 1913, there exists no record of a large-scale dispossession of the crude nature that General Herzog introduced in June of 1913. With the arrival of various peoples in this part of the world that we call South Africa today, some from Europe, others from the Philippines here as slaves, others from Malaysia as slaves, others from England, others from Germany and France as religious fugitives from religious wars, arrived here over between 1652 and 1913. All of those people, you need to think. You must think. In this country, the people congregated here. They joined with each other. Today we have, and then those people, there was no title before they came. Title became part of the process of settlement. And then in the course of all of that, people of our country mixed and all of that, they emerged among other things. They made a large number of the population of our country today called colored. I don't know who colored who. Nevertheless, even those people, over there you must think, and you must confront history. And then people acquired title all over. By the way, here in the Cape under the British, and KZN under the British, there was what was called qualified franchise. Many of you think there was always apartheid. Apartheid is introduced in 1948. But throughout, all of us, all of our people were entitled to buy and possess land, and that's how title became the order of the day in South Africa. It was only in 1913 when General Herzog, after the National Party had won the elections, introduced the 1913 Land Act and passed a law that said black South Africans can only be entitled to live on 8%, 8-point-something% of the land of South Africa. And that was followed by what Sol Plaatje deals with systematically in native life in South Africa, of how Africans were dispossessed. And that they tried to ameliorate in 1935, 1936 Land and Trust Act, when they tried to increase that 8% to 13%. And that is why when we were negotiating at CODESA, in fact, over the years, even in prisons on Robben Island, we studied this question to understand how we could get our country out of the depth of the danger of mutual slaughter for no reason. That we concluded that the 1913 Land Act represented a major point at which we must say people that owned land and that still had title, some still have, others didn't have because they'd lost them, that those people must come forward with those titles and that land must be returned to them.
Honourable Member.
That is the first point. I want to make that point. This subject is fraught with dangers if we don't think what we are doing. I thank you, Chair, but this is not. We need more discussion on this question.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Otherwise, we're putting our country in danger.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Meshu.
Chairperson, the ACDP recognizes that South Africa has a unique history of dispossession of land from black people by colonialists and that because government's current land reform program has been fraught with difficulties since its inception, land reform has been far too slow. However, we disagree with the sentiment that at the center of the present crisis regarding the resolution of the land question is the property clause in section 25(1) of the Constitution, which protects private property rights. Chairperson, the property clause was debated at great length, and the drafters of our Constitution then concluded that it had to be included in the Constitution to protect all citizens against state abuse. The protections in the Constitution are not there for a select few, but for all in South Africa who own or aspire to own property. We should not pass legislation because we trust ourselves to do the right thing, but we should pass legislation that will ensure that any government to come will be constrained and held accountable to do the right thing. We are concerned that the land issue is being used as a political football in the case of the EFF to garner support, and in the case of the ANC to detract from more pressing issues such as widespread corruption and lack of service delivery in this case. Chairperson, we also need to be mindful of what the Constitutional Court said regarding illegal land invasions. It said to allow such would be a recipe for anarchy. We would caution, therefore, that to consider expropriating land without any form of compensation would similarly be a recipe for anarchy in the country. The ACDP believes that we need to jointly find solutions to the land issue. Partnerships with existing, experienced, and emerging farmers with the state playing a facilitating role is one possibility. We are in favor of finding solutions, but believe the amendment of the property rights clause is not the answer. Recent calls by President Zuma and the Land Reform Minister Gugile Nkwinti that government should start land expropriation without compensation are not helpful in this regard. The disastrous consequences of such actions will be a breakdown of reconciliation and national unity in our country, and all that the late President Mandela fought and stood for, and would open the floodgates for land invasions and confrontation that will unfortunately lead to injuries, loss of life, and property. The ACDP does not support this draft resolution. We support expropriation where necessary, with compensation as stipulated in our Constitution. The ACDP does not want to see chaotic land invasions in our country as a result of this expropriation that many are talking about. We know that vast tracts of land have been left idle, reflecting lack of resources, skills, and capacity on the part of the new owners. Commercial farmers and formal agricultural structures have been destroyed, and what used to be profitable land has now been rendered unproductive. That's why we believe that coming together to rationally resolve this problem of land redistribution would be the best way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Chaisa.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. The land issue has long been a critical one and very important. The founding fathers and mothers of our constitutional democracy were alive to the prevailing anomalies of land depreciation in South Africa following the aftermath of the 1913 Land Act, which reserved only 13% of land to the people. Frantz Fanon has written on the land issue. He stated, I quote, "For a colonized people, the most essential value, because it is the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread and above all dignity." Thank you. According to President Zuma, only 8 million hectares of arable land have been transferred to the black people out of 82 million hectares of the land. It is not very much easy, therefore, to preach transformation, interdependence, social cohesion, and reconciliation when the land is controlled by a fringe minority. The former Deputy Chief Justice, Dikgang Moseneke, stated, I quote, "In 20 years of our court has not resolved even one case of land expropriation under the property clause by the government for a public purpose. Similarly, in the same time, the courts have never been called upon to give meaning to the property clause in the context of land expropriation or to decide on what is just and equitable compensation," close quote. The IEC believes, therefore, that land expropriation can still be achieved through the Constitution. We should take leave from Dikgang Moseneke, the former Deputy Chief Justice. Land is one of the sources of wealth, and it can contribute to the growth of our economy. We therefore agree with the fact that this Section 25 of the Constitution should be revisited for the purpose of benefiting many, not for the purpose of punishing any person, because we realize now that land is just in the hands of the few, which is not good. Land is a source of wealth, and it is said that people shall share. Without compensation does not mean that we are punishing anyone, or perhaps the people that are having land. But now we're just trying to bring about what is referred to as this radical transformation. So it is then through the land that the people should benefit, and we hope that land is important, and if most of the people now are just in the hands or perhaps not having land, they will be in a position to contribute to our economy. It is for this reason that we'll be in a position to support that this land now should be returned to the people.
Honourable Member, your time is now expired.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Obama. Order, honourable members.
Honourable Chair, fellow South Africans, to the majority of our people, the ownership of land is seen as an inherent right that was violated by the Apartheid Natives Land Act of 1913. Land tenure is inextricably linked to an individual's identity, dignity, and a sense of belonging. Millions of our people do not feel the sense of belonging, as land reform post-1994 has been an unmitigated disaster. Land reform was supposed to address dispossession and injustice, to create more equitable distribution of land, to reduce poverty and stimulate economic growth, and to provide security of tenure, all of which the ANC government has failed to achieve, despite the availability of a litany of legislation and grant programs. Land reform has fallen victim to political manipulation by the ruling ANC elite, compounded by its own hubris and insularity.
Order, honourable members.
The ANC government now seeks to use the Constitution as an excuse, presenting it as a barrier to effective land reform and thus deflecting the responsibility for their failures. Fellow South Africans, let us not be hoodwinked into accepting this red herring. Small-scale farmers, labor tenants, farm workers, communal area residents, women, and our youth, the lost generation, are the intended beneficiaries who have been most affected by the government's abysmal failure in the delivery of land reform. 23 years into this democracy, the land tenure rights of the rural poor are still not addressed. Security of tenure, preferably in the form of legal ownership, unlocks access to economic development and real jobs for the lost generation, especially in agriculture. Bill Clinton said, and I quote, "Work is about more than making a living, as vital as that is. It's fundamental to human dignity, to a sense of self-worth as useful, independent, free people," close quote. With youth unemployment so high in South Africa, do we not then owe it to this lost generation to unlock the immense potential in successful land reform. Instead of tampering with an excellent constitution, a DA-led government will enact legislation securing the property rights of those who live on state land, state-owned land reform projects, and former homelands. The DA wants our poor to own their own property. Rezone communal land areas as municipalities so that our rural poor get the same service delivery and support as urban areas. Provide an ongoing package of extension services, financial support networks, technical and managerial assistance, as well as invest in supportive infrastructure, as seen in the Western Cape. We will remove the vestiges of apartheid and colonial planning and the embedded semi-feudal systems it engendered in the former homelands. Nowhere should paternalism obstruct progress. We will ensure that land reform is an opportunity around which South Africans can unite rather than a source of anxiety. Land reform can attract massive investment to those who are marginalized. Fellow South Africans, Section 25 of the Constitution is not a constraint to land reform, but the very backbone of successful reform. The motion by the EFF to review and amend the property clause is not supported by the Democratic Alliance because we care about property rights for the poor. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Nguni.
Jabulela hlali ngaphambili kahlele kubaphathiswa abakhona phakathi kwethu nosekela abaphathiswa namalungu alendlu yowisomthetho uHonorable Mbabama osuka apha uthethe iziphikisi uyandiva she understands vernacular very well uthethe iziphikisi uqala athi emotion ye-ANC aphinde xa ugqiba athi hayi le motion ye-EFF kwakufuneka into yokuba athethe into ibenye angathathi emva athethe phambili obeme apha okamalema endulula le motion uthi yena those who were involved in negotiations sold out. You really have got to get close to some of the leadership. Some of the veterans and leaders are still alive. And hear exactly what the consultations, what the balance of forces were, what were the discussions in the movement then. You really have got to get it clear. I remember the battle cry at that point was that you cannot win in the table that which you have not won in the battlefield. All negotiations are subject to the balance of forces in the battlefield, not as wishes some 23 years later. They reflect that reality. One of our alliance components sat in Cuba in its 8th Congress in 1988. I don't know if you were there. And in characterizing the South African Revolution, it was said that conditions were ripe for mass insurrection. Starte ilizwe ngezigalo. That was only a moment when Operation Vula was about to be unleashed. In fact, all the infrastructure had been established inside the country. At that point in time, the regime gave in. It was in this or at the old assembly that de Klerk announced the unbanning of the ANC and all other formations, the release of Nelson Mandela and so forth. That defines in the list the context in which negotiations actually took place. Yes, the ultra-right was busy bulldozing at World Trade Center and doing things of sorts, but the ANC led even at that moment, hence the dispensation which we have actually right now. I want to dedicate my input to the memory of a fallen white compatriot. Because in tabling this motion, Honorable Malema said, I quote, no white person can understand. A visionary, a selfless revolutionary, an armed combatant, and a communist to the end. That's none other than the leader, Comrade Joe Slovo. Comrade Joe Slovo.
Order, honourable members. Order. Continue, honourable member.
Throughout the struggle epoch, he marked a unique caliber of white intelligentsia and white revolutionaries. He was a commander-in-chief of Umkhonto weSizwe. He played a very pivotal role to liberating us to this day. So yes, among white people, we had white patriots. In fact, in 1990-91, at the Talks About Talks, the white minority regime complained that the ANC delegation may not include Joe Slovo. So he was public enemy number one to the system. I dedicate this contribution to him. Once again, a number of parties come here and debate, but they miss a fundamental point that the South African colonial question, the South African land question, is a direct factor or directly related to the colonial question. In fact, just to teach everyone, it would be nice to quote from a judge in a recent judgment of the 28th of the 7th last year. In this judgment, I quote, "To those who personally experienced the forced removals and those who, instead of inheriting the illegitimately wrestled land, inherited the pain of loss of homes and property, the dispossessions are not merely colonial and apartheid-era memories. They continue to be post-apartheid realities, which are more so in the case of those who are yet to enjoy the fruits of restitution or equitable redress," close quote. Says Judge Madlanga, and supported by all the bench at the Constitutional Court. You should just mark AFF equitable redress, because clearly you always parade as though you support the judiciary. The judge has spoken, the Concord has spoken, the date was the 28th of the 7th last year. They talk about equitable redress. You want to introduce your own thing. Maybe it's a smoke screen for all the court cases you are appearing in, for the crime that you are saying people must invade land. Now, you want to make it as though it's a political call. It is reactionary to the call. Chair, we've always said that the character of the South African society must be looked at against its own characterization through colonialism. We've said here before that racism was a myth just to cover imperialism and capitalism. We repeat the point and we challenge the reactionary intelligentsia. Simon van der Stel, who didn't pass a pure race test. Simon van der Stel himself, a descendant on the one side, on the maternal side of an Indian slave, so to speak. Let's go to history and dispute that. So racism was always a myth right from the onset. Parties must look at themselves. One party has got to look at itself. Now and again, it's got to assure the public that it is not racist. All the time, from amongst the midst of the rank and file of that party, racists always show the ugly head all the time. So racism, we must uncover to the racists who are flying with the smoke screen that, in fact, underlying it is the class and even the gender question, right? Now, exactly, land takes place in South Africa in a racialized context, full stop. There can be nothing better than that. Now, we want also to refer to gender and male domination in society and chauvinism, and which has led to the triple oppression of the African working women. In fact, we hold, because everyone who talks gender, we think that we're talking the same thing. Ours is a notion of revolutionary feminism and not liberal feminism, right? Now, in fact, race, class, and gender must be looked at in balance. Otherwise, we risk landing into workerism, we risk landing into narrow nationalism, we risk landing into liberalism, we risk landing into liberal feminism, and all sorts of distortions. The 1994 breakthrough, here's the speech. It's not what you want, it's what we want. Because you have a far-fetched motion that would never see the light of day. That breakthrough sought to tilt and reverse the colonial epochs of 1652, the Union of South Africa of 1910, the 1913 Land Act, and the 1948 Group Areas Act. No one alludes to the Group Areas Act. Thank you to Honorable Sheikh, because he is right. He is referring even to the current existing dispossession taking place in Woodstock and elsewhere. Right. Some reasons, listen to this carefully, why the EFF's motion does not resonate and may not resonate with the ANC. You refer to the 8% of the land. Now, the 8% that you refer to as having been transferred thus far, you do not indicate whether you are referring to redistribution, or you are referring to tenure reform, or you are referring to restitution. You are just howling and shooting into the dark, into the hip. Be clear what 8% you talk to. On restitution, how would EFF account for those people who have opted for financial compensation? How would you count them into the 8%? Now, the various redistributive programs like the RADP, the PLUS, and so on, that are programs on redistribution of land, do you include them in the 8% or you don't? Right. Now, Parliament has a clear mechanism, as has been outlined by Committee Chair, Comrade Ngwenya Mabila, clear mechanism of a Constitution Review Committee. You abruptly jump and ask to give ANC 6%. The ANC is needing your 6% so desperately. What for when there is Parliamentary Constitution Review Committee? Why can't your amendments be looked at there? In fact, I can paraphrase for you what you want. That 25.1 says, no one may be deprived in terms of, except for law of general application. All you want is everyone must be deprived only through that law. That law is forthcoming in actual fact. We reject the EFF, even its call for land invasion. The ANC rejects the EFF's position. Thank you.
The next speaker is the Honorable Plawama.
Honorable Chair, thank
Order,
you.
honorable members.
Honorable members. Cowardice can be an illness. You must heal it before it becomes chronic. The ruling elite of today will not support this motion. They are cowards. Seduced by big houses and big cars, and a chair at the table of those who benefited from apartheid and colonialism. Honorable members, Chief Skikuni, legendary Mbambata, and King Kosa, King of the Kosa, and warriors are smiling wherever they are. Their descendants are now smelling the coffee. Almost all wars fought in South Africa were all about the land and mineral resources. The Imperial British still benefit through international corporations. Anglo-Boer was all about independent and land annexation. The negotiation that led to the Union of South Africa paved the way which the Afrikaners benefited, culminating to them reaching political power in 1948. When D.F. Malan and his predecessors gave monopoly of land to Afrikaners, they never thought once about black people. We were treated like children and worse, animals. Now, fast forward, we came to 1994. Our leaders, for the sake of peace, they settled for scrums on the table. They were absorbed and assimilated to the civilization of Western Europe. In a nutshell, they were anglicized, and they quickly forgot the blood and the murder of kings who stood the ground. How Chief Skukunu wrote a letter to the then Transvaal under the President Beggar and British representative to stop their aggression. They never listened because land is everything. You take it from the people, they are left naked and homeless and disorientated. Honorable members, our constitution obliges us under Section 25 to treat fairly even those who inherited land from Paul Kruger and D.F. Malan and Verfruit ideology. It compels us to choose not to go the Robert Mugabe road, but to be fair and just in our approach. But, honorable members, the reason why Aranga says about this motion is because in 23 years since we've been having this democracy, black people are suffering even worse than during the time of apartheid. I want to warn seriously those who think things are normal when black people are still dispossessed to go for the nearest river to baptize themselves. There's nothing normal. We don't have a country. Our country is still in the hands of the descendants of those who came from Netherlands, and above all, those who came from Britain. This country cannot be stable, cannot have a true democracy until black people, Africa in particular,
Honourable Member,
are
your
able.
time has now expired.
We support this motion.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Binda.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. Babungwende, I'm very disappointed with your comrades. More especially Umama Uru, who is chairing our committee in land reform. I don't know what Utatu Balomfo Umgoni was saying here. He was not even addressing this important issue, you see, of land question. So I think you must stop, you must just fire both of them. I don't think they are representing the marginalized people of this country. You see, our current constitution does not address the land issue in favor of the indigenous people, which is the African people. Then as a result, I think what we should have done in the constitution when everybody was rushing for negotiations, because Utatu Makwetu was very clear all the time, more especially about the issue of the land. My proposal is that we must firstly change the preamble of the Constitution as follows. We people of South Africa declares that our land and its mineral resources were stolen or robbed from the indigenous people by the white monopoly capital. It must therefore be returned to its rightful owners, the indigenous people. That's what we should have been doing. Then this issue, it would have not been a problem. As the PAC, we are appealing to all members of the House from various political organizations, at least to support the repeal of Section 25 of our Constitution. We all know that our people, the African people, they do not have money to pay for the stolen land because our wealth is still within the hands of the white monopoly capital. All the social ills that our people are suffering from are as a result of us being landless. With the land in our control, we will be able to change the lives of our people for the better forever. So I must say I'm disappointed because we all know that this land that we are talking about, the ocean, the oxygen that we are talking about, is a gift that was given to the citizen, the indigenous people of this country, by God. That is why we are saying as PAC, land cannot be sold, land cannot be bought, it should not be treated as a commodity. It must just be taken from those who have stolen it from the African people. Ndiyabhena ndiyaphila masingabi nayo le ngxaki yoba sithi noba sesingcwaba kufuneka ephaya eBuffalo City umuntu abhatale 3,000 xa efuna umhlaba ongathi ubhetele xa uzawurhafela umhlaba ade abhatale i-9,000 uba ufuna uyongcwaba eCambridge ebelungwini ufuneka ubhatale i-9,000 lihlazo otherwise ama-Afrika azazithathela lo mhlaba if niyaxothisa because aba babini they are busy contradicting.
Honourable Member, your time is now expired. The next speaker is Honourable Gordy. Order, Honourable Members.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair, comrades and honourable members. The APC will support any measure, resolution or program that seek to enhance and fast-track access to land by the dispossessed African majority. The message must be sent strongly and consistently that whites cannot continue to own land in excess to their population figures. The fact that white people as a social class talk about reconciliation whilst tenaciously clinging to wealth and land accumulated through the criminal oppression and exploitation of the majority indigenous Africans means the majority is being taken for a ride. The fight against racism, poverty, inequality, and the restoration of the dignity and humanity of the Africans find their concrete resolution in restoring land to our people. Our people continue to live like refugees in their own country, treated as subhumans in the farms, evicted, the graves of their forefathers desecrated, etc. The APC supports this motion for no more a reason than that the issue of land must be at the center of our transformation programs and freedom. The land question is a genuine call. The APC supports it. All Africans and freedom-loving people of South Africa must unite to ensure that the national grievance is addressed. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Walters.
Honourable Chair, I'm at the moment surprised. I think a historical event took place, and that's Member Gordy disagreeing with the ANC. The Democratic Alliance welcomes this opportunity, like the Honourable Lakota, to kick off a genuine debate as to the causes, problems and solutions of land reform. Most of you today are actually celebrating and welcoming this opportunity to display our pride in a constitution that, rather than prevents us from achieving justice and redress in land reform, is in fact our most powerful tool to do exactly that. While we do not associate with the implied solution in this motion constitutional change to the challenges of land reform, we do agree that a genuine foundational debate about this matter has long been overdue, and in this House, amongst us as politicians and also in society at large. The absence of meaningful debate since 1994 provided this ANC government with a choice no government should ever have had. On the one hand, it could choose to use Clause 25 of our Constitution that specifically provides the framework for the rapid expansion of property ownership for those excluded from it in the past, and in the process unlocked suppressed talents and abilities of black South Africans, particularly the lost generation of South Africans left behind. It could have made that choice. It could choose to make South Africa an economic success story where economic growth is matched with a reduction of inequality through the use of property ownership and a stake in that economic growth. Yet there was another choice. It was a choice that gave an organizational elite embedded in the liberation movement the opportunity to insulate itself from ideas and initiatives, close itself to accountability, and create a crony system of government where delivery is not about the people, but self-enrichment. It was an alternative choice to use its power to attract the highest bidder, to use every tender, every land deal, and every development to build the foundations of probably the greatest criminal enterprise in the world today. Fellow South Africans, the ANC made that choice. Now, as its domination is rapidly waning and the shock of loss of power is being felt, the governing party is doing account for replacing the people with personal profit. Out of ideas for the people, it has only one card to play to hold on to its privileges, and that is to set up lightning conductors to draw energy away from the historic failure. And unfortunately, this motion is helping to set up such a lightning conductor. It is not Clause 25 that reduces the supposed beneficiaries of land reform projects to unpaid workers without property rights on taxpayer-subsidized state farms, farms that are milked dry by cronies of the ANC. It is in fact our Constitution that will protect their right to ownership of such land once a government dedicated to fairness provides it to them. It is not Clause 25 that leaves the rural poor and former homelands without title deed on the land they have farmed for generations. Rural poor deliberately kept in poverty to lock them into voting for the ANC. It is in fact our Constitution that will protect the right to ownership of such land once a government believing in freedom provides it to them. It's not Clause 25 that prevented the purchase of land readily available on the market, as any survey will show, at reasonable prices. It would have assisted at transforming agricultural sector stability, concurrently providing much-needed jobs in a sector currently shedding jobs. It is in fact our Constitution that will protect transformation in a flourishing agricultural sector once a caring government believing in opportunity makes land reform successful. It is not Clause 25 that allowed extension services, the Agricultural Research Council, suitable financing for farmers, investment opportunities, drought relief, agricultural colleges, land claims and purchases of land to fail. It is not Clause 25 that fails to take workable proposals from organised agriculture, community property associations and land reform beneficiaries on board. It is not Clause 25 that is to blame for state capture, division in the ANC and failure at the ballot box. Fellow South Africans, the Constitution is the very institution that guarantees the economic freedom of those marginalised and dispossessed that is now being blamed for a lack of progress. For us to do so as politicians is like a craftsman blaming his own tools. By blaming the Constitution, en ek kan byvoeg ons legitieme beleggers in landbou, ons boere, for the failures of this government, we are not only playing by the rules of survival of an emerging gangster state, but also risking the future of every single South Africa who come into property for the first time. The DA is the only party that genuinely wants the poor to own property. We do not want the poor to remain poor. The DA has shown that transversal government, incorporating all levels of government that brings all stakeholders together, can successfully empower the poor.
Your time is now expired.
The DA stands with the Constitution.
The next speaker is the Deputy Minister of Public Works.
Thank you, House Speaker, colleagues and comrades. Let's begin by agreeing with some of what is contained in the introductory paragraphs of the draft resolution which has been submitted by the Honourable Shivambu in the name of the EFF. It is absolutely true that South Africa has had a history of brutal dispossession of land by colonial and white minority regimes. The draft resolution says a unique history. I would suggest that we remove the word unique. Let's be internationalist, because after all, genocidal colonial projects have occurred throughout North and South America, Australasia, Africa, and as we speak today, in Palestine. So let's be internationalist and not narrowly exclusivist about being South African. It is true, as the draft resolution says, that this colonial and apartheid past has left a deep mark, although it says an indelible mark. No, this mark must be delible. It must be erasable. We need to erase it radically through radical economic transformation. It's also true, as other speakers have said from the ANC, that the current land reform program has been fraught with difficulties and the pace has been frustratingly slow. Where the draft resolution, Honourable Shivambu, starts to go off the rails is in its 5th paragraph, where it tells us that, quote, at the centre of the present crisis regarding the land question is section 25, sub 1 of the Constitution. I'm not sure, Honourable Shivambu, why you've singled out sub-clause 1 of section 25, which reads, let me quote it, no one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. The reason why this is the very first clause inserted by those of us who were involved in the negotiations at CODESA in section 25 of the property clause is precisely because of the brutal colonial and apartheid era arbitrary deprivation of land, of property and of livelihoods. Never again shall we allow arbitrary deprivation in this country. Never again must we allow it. However, what clause 25 of the Constitution is not saying is that existing property relations are sacrosanct and must be left untouched. On the contrary, in the first place, section 25 calls for security of tenure, of ownership, in cases where the apartheid past has left millions of South Africans with insecure tenure or no tenure. Women in areas of land tenure, for instance, with insecure property rights. That's very important. In the second place, section 25 empowers expropriation in the public interest, and it defines public interest as including the nation's commitment to land reform and to reforms to bring about equitable access to all South Africa's natural resources, water, minerals, etc. And it adds, property is not just limited to the land, unlike what the DA has tried to change the Constitution into meaning. Under subclause 5 of the property clause, the Constitution says the state must, not may, should consider, should think about, the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures to foster conditions which enable citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. And under subclause 8 of the property clause, the Constitution declares no provision of this section may impede the state from taking legislative and other measures to achieve land, water, and related reform in order to redress the results of past racial discrimination. In short, it is absolutely misguided to treat the property clause in the Constitution as an albatross around our necks, as at best a necessary concession that was made in a difficult balance of forces during the negotiated settlement in the 1990s. I agree, therefore, with Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke, the former Deputy Chief Justice, that Clause 25 is in fact radical in both spirit and in its letter. And I further concur with the judge that it's misguided to blame Clause 25 for the weaknesses in land reform. As Judge Moseneke has said, government has so far failed to test the radical transformational reach of the idea of compensation for expropriation being based on the just and equitable principle, not based primarily or exclusively on the basis of market value. Let's remind ourselves, Section 25 says explicitly that the determination of just and equitable must reflect an equitable balance between the public interest and those affected by expropriation, having regard to all relevant circumstances, including the current use of the property. Is there an absentee landlord? That should certainly affect how we appropriate, if we expropriate, how we reflect on compensation. The history of the acquisition and use of the property as a result of group areas removals, that should surely impact upon whatever compensation is made. The market value, yes, it's there, but it's not prime among equals, and the extent of direct state investment, et cetera, et cetera. Where expropriation of poor communities occurs, perhaps to build a dam, the just and equitable principle would surely suggest compensation far in excess of market value. Contrariwise, where there will be cases where the history of acquisition of the property, for instance, or its current use, will require compensation considerably below market value. Indeed, there's no reason why compensation might be just symbolic, R2, in order to meet the requirements, and let the courts decide if that is just and equitable, fair and equitable. The EFF radically misreads the Constitution and thus falls into the trap that has historically been laid by the DA and its hangers-on. Now, I'm very pleased to see that there's a recalibration of the DA's stance, because I think they're realizing their opposition to the expropriation bill in this House has created the conditions for opportunism. There has been enough dispossession in our country. Let's not allow the DA and their hangers-on to dispossess us of the spirit and literal meaning of the hard-won 1996 Constitution. I've heard a DA leader, not currently, and I'm pleased to hear the Honourable Lottreet and others being more sensible, but a DA leader, a leader of the opposition in this House, not so long ago, stood up and said, not the current one, stood up and said, the willing seller, willing buyer approach is entrenched in the Constitution. Utter nonsense, poppycock. Premier Helen Zille said that the DA's strategy was to split the ANC into the constitutionalists who believe in the rule of law and the radicals who support National Democratic Revolution. We are radicals, we support National Democratic Revolution, and we are constitutionalists, and we believe in the rule of law. The Constitution is not a 19th century liberal document. In introducing this draft resolution, the Honourable Shivambu is making an innocent, but I would like to believe, misguided assumption. Let's pretend for a moment. Let's play the game of pretend. Let's assume that we amend the Constitution to allow expropriation without compensation. Who is it that will then drive land expropriation without compensation? Perhaps the EFF will be the ruling party. Let's pretend that might happen. And perhaps a Thomas Sankara or Che Guevara will emerge from their ranks, an honourable politician. Perhaps that might happen. Perhaps they will be ruling in coalition with other partners, and perhaps those coalition partners will support the Thomas Sankara of the future and the EFF to lead the process of land reform without compensation. But there's many perhapses and many ifs and buts in that. We need to make laws and we need to defend the Constitution not based on perhaps or if, but what will work for all seasons. What if instead of a Thomas Sankara, we get a parasitic emerging elite linked to a future government pursuing private accumulation? Can we imagine how, in the name of public interest, powers of expropriation without restraint, without compensation, will be exploited? And we know exactly what will happen, because we just need to look across the Limpopo to see who are the main victims when this happens. The same black majority who've been oppressed in the past. Farm workers, the urban and rural poor, with chronic food shortages and skyrocketing food prices, as a small connected elite seize land in the name of the public interest. So be careful what you wish for, I say to my colleagues across there in the EFF. Much of this debate, but not all of it, because I'm pleased to hear that some of the speakers have also recognized that when we talk about the land question, we're not talking only about rural and farming issues. Yes, critically, we're talking about those. Nor are we talking about a magical return to pre-1652 or even pre-1913. What do we mean when we say, let's return the land to the indigenous people? What message are we sending to the millions of South Africans who are descendants of those who came not as white colonialists into this country, but came as slaves or indentured laborers? So we must be very careful of having a narrow Africanism. Of course, the exploitation and brutal expropriation of the African majority and indigenous majority is something but very important. But let's broaden our horizon. Well over 60% of South Africans are now urbanized. The land issue is now predominantly an urban question. And nor should we imagine that systematic mass-scale dispossession occurred only in the distant colonial and the relatively distant apartheid past. As we speak now, massive dispossession of poor black communities is actively happening, driven by the market, by property speculators, by corrupt court officials and estate agents, and by the crisis of indebtedness of the working poor and lower middle classes. The scale of home repossessions by the banks, some 100,000 every year, is approaching apartheid-era group area removal proportions. As we speak now, as one former speaker mentioned, down the road in Woodstock, or up in the Boerkaap, communities are being dispossessed in the name of development, quote unquote, by speculative property market activities aided and abetted by city officials and city politicians. On the Cape Flats, in Philippines, small farmers have temporarily won a reprieve from being dispossessed so that a shopping mall and a privately run prison can be developed, driven by the mayor of the city of Cape Town, regardless of the environmental considerations, regardless of sustainable livelihoods for hundreds. So much for defending property rights of the poor, DA. The democratic state needs expropriating powers. It needs to be able to drive rural and land reform, mixed income, medium density, human settlements. All of this is captured admirably in the Constitution,
Minister,
and especially within
your
Section 25.
time is now expired.
We don't need to change the Constitution, we need to implement it.
The Honourable Malema.
Thank you very much, Chair. The EFF has succeeded in exposing the hypocrisy of the ANC to the South African population. That you are not honourable enough to stick to your own ways. Your president spoke about the expropriation. You came here and contradicted him. Some of your colleagues spoke about expropriation. You came here and contradicted them. And when the last speaker was speaking here, actually, one of the ministers was encouraging me to listen, because that's what you do. You listen to white messiahs, because on your own you can't do, on your own you can't think, and it is the white messiahs who have put us into this crisis. The same Joe Slovo that you praise is the one that came with Slovo clauses that made huge compromises, and the African majority today are suffering because he was defending white property ownership. So we want to put it very clear that we have made it available to the ANC to implement exactly what the president said he wants to do, and the ANC rejected it. Because you never mean anything you say. You stand up and say you fight corruption, and you bring corruption right into parliament in the name of Brian Molefe. Those are the things you are known for. You say this and do the opposite. And today the entire country has seen you for who you are. You bring here people who have got no clarity of what we are speaking about, except the last speaker who attempted but just stick to rereading the Constitution. The Honorable Mguni comes here and speaks about feminism when we are speaking about land. He says revolutionary feminism and liberal feminism. Hey, what is he talking about? And then he says, Malema, you must sit with the veterans of the struggle. I might appear young to you, but for your information, I've sat with a lot of struggle veterans. I even stayed in their houses more than you, because by just speaking here, it's clear that you are just a backbencher from a branch who found himself in this house by accident. You don't understand national issues. You must return to a branch so that you can continue counting membership forms. Issues here are beyond your capacity. You must still go through the structures so that you develop national consciousness, so that tomorrow when you come here, you can reflect the national status of issues and not some short-sightedment and talking about things that you don't have clarity about. So we want to say, as the EFF, that radical economic transformation is just a rhetoric. You are not going to implement it. You don't mean it. Zuma says it because he wants to reposition himself so that he can have some legacy. He will be known as the most useless president who has never meant anything that came out of his mouth. He's just blowing hot air on radical economic transformation.
Thank you. Order, honorable members. Order. Honorable members, that concludes the debate. Honorable members, the motion in the name of the Honorable Shavambu has been printed on the order paper. I now put the motion. Are there any objections? There are objections. I will put the question. Those in favor will say aye. And those against will say no. I think the noes have it.
The chairperson were calling for division.
A division having been called, the bells will be rung for 5 minutes.
We don't want people who cause disorder here in the house. We don't want people who cause disorder here in the house.
From Biafra. From Biafra. Yeah. Oh, when I will be here. Please have it done. No, it's fine. From
Honourable members, will you take up your allocated seats, please? Honourable members, I would like to remind you that you may only vote from your allocated seat, and when requested to do so, you must simply indicate your vote by pressing the appropriate button below the yes, no, or abstain signs. If a member inadvertently presses the wrong button, the member may thereafter press the correct button. The last button pressed will be recorded as the member's vote when the voting session is closed. The question before the House is that the motion as moved by the Honourable N.F. Shivambu be agreed to. Are all members in their allocated seats? Voting will now commence. Those in favour of the motion should press the yes button. Those against should press the no button. And those wishing to abstain should press the abstain button. Have all members voted? The voting session is now closed. Honourable members, the outcome of the division is as follows. Order, honourable members. The outcome of the division is as follows. Those in favour 33, those against 261. There are 2 abstentions and the motion is therefore not agreed to. Honourable members, order. Order, honourable members. Honourable members, on Tuesday, the 21st of February 2017, the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries responded to a statement on the killing of farmers in isiXhosa. The translation of his response is as follows, and I quote, "Human dignity in farms must be equal, and there is no one in this department who thinks killing of farmers is normal. Killing of farmers and farm workers is a bad practice because killing is the same, and it is painful to all families. Let us change when we look at these things and stop discrimination. We will get respect in the farms if farmers can treat their workers in a good manner, and that will make peace. I close quote. Thereafter, the Honourable Chief Whip of the Opposition rose on a point of order and requested to address me in terms of Rule 85 and said, and I quote, "There have been several rulings in this House that one may not impute that another member of this House is a racist," close quote. He indicated that the Honourable Minister's response indicate that the Honourable Steyn was, what the Honourable Steyn was doing in the House was racist. I indicated, and the Honourable Chief Whip also requested me to look at Hansard, and if necessary, return to the House with a considered ruling. Having read the unrevised Hansard, I now rule as follows. The remarks made by the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries were not in contravention of the rules, as he did not refer to the Honourable Steyn or any other member of the House as racist, as alleged by the Honourable Chief Whip of the Opposition. His remarks were general in nature and is therefore not unparliamentary. Honourable members, we will now
House
proceed.
Chairperson.
Yes, Honourable Member.
House Chairperson, thank you very much for the ruling, and we accept the ruling wholeheartedly. But I do believe that we have a problem then with the translation services that are being offered. And I would ask that the presiding officers do take this up to ensure that the simultaneous translation that we're getting is an accurate reflection of what members on the floor are saying. Because I've no doubt if you examined the translation that was coming through, you would have reached a different conclusion. But we respect your ruling and accept it.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Members, we now come to motions without notice. Does any member of the ANC wish to give a motion without notice?
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, we move that this House notes with sadness the passing of Judge Esa Musa, an anti-apartheid activist and a human rights lawyer who passed on the Sunday, the 26th February 2017, after a short illness. This House will also recall that Judge Esa Musa was a qualified lawyer and was admitted to practice by the High Court of the Supreme Court of South Africa on the 1st of June 1962. This House further recalls that Judge Musa was a founding and executive member of the National Association of the Democratic Lawyers and chaired its Human Rights Committee. This House remembers him as a champion for all those who depended on a just and fair legal system. Further remembers him as a warrior who fought tirelessly for the legal precepts that we have come to cherish as South Africans. We recall that in April 1998, he was appointed by President Nelson Mandela as the judge of the High Court of the Supreme Court of South Africa. We further recall that he retired as a judge of the Western Cape High Court in 2011, and in 2013, he was appointed head of a unit that will investigate complaints against members of the Directorate for Priority Crimes Investigations, better known as the Hawks. We believe that Judge Musa's death is an enormous loss to the people of South Africa. And lastly, we convey as a House our condolences to the Judge Musa's family and friends during this painful time. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motions? The motion is agreed to. GA?
Thank you, Chair. I hereby move on behalf of the Democratic Alliance that this House knows that on Friday, the 17th of February 2017, 14 people from Ward 93 in Khayelitsha sadly passed away in a shack fire in the early hours of the morning. Also knows that the deceased includes an adult male and female, as well as 2 young children. Further knows that a 24-year-old boy was lucky to survive the ordeal and is now in the care of their relatives. Acknowledges that the fire was allegedly caused by a faulty ESCOM box. Further acknowledges that many families from throughout South Africa go through the same ordeal on a regular basis. Thanks the community of Khayelitsha and representatives from the city of Cape Town who have shown an immense amount of support to the family in various different forms over this difficult period. At the Democratic Alliance, we convey our sincere condolences to the family and friends of the deceased. I thank you.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion? No objections. Agreed to. EFF?
Thank you, House Chair. I rise on behalf of the economic freedom fighters to move without notice that the House notes that yesterday, the 27th of February, former President Thabo Mbeki was inaugurated as a Chancellor of the University of South Africa. Further note that President Mbeki remains one of the very few statesmen in Africa who encompass integrity and a credible educational history. These are the necessary ingredients in not only occupying the office of a Chancellor, but in instilling a respectable reputation in academia and in UNISA, South Africa and Africa at large. Acknowledge that the diminishing reputation of academia in society should be restored. Indeed, key challenges of curriculum and institutional transformation, together with access and success as it is related to the poor and African child, should remain a priority. Further acknowledge that former President Thabo Mbeki will preside over UNISA as a Chancellor with the support of the EFF. We vehemently believe that the office of a Chancellor in academia will now have a societal influence that has never been witnessed before in our country. Wishes that former President of South Africa preside over this prestigious office with his inherent leadership qualities with grace and success until the free education for all comes. Congratulations to the former President on this milestone in his long and illustrious career. I so move.
Thank you. Any objection to the motion? No objection. Agreed to. ANC?
The African National Congress moves without notice that the House notes that the short film Tears in the Rain, which was locally made, has picked up one of the major awards from the Sci-Fi Underground Film Festival, which took place in Munich recently. Further notes that this 11-minute film received the Best Acting Award for the two cast members, that is, Sean Cameron Michael and Russell Savadier. Understands that this film was produced on a minuscule budget of only 20,000 rands and was filmed in South Africa in just 2 days. Further understands that Tears in the Rain has been entered in a number of film festivals, including the Josie Film Festival, the London Independent Film Awards, the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival, the Philip D. Dick Science Fiction Film Festival, and the Los Angeles Film Festival, and congratulates Harvey and Andrew Eric MacDonald for making a brilliant film that has put South Africa on the world map in this field once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any objection to the motion? No objection. Agreed to. IFP?
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. I hereby move on behalf of the Inkatha Freedom Party that this House extends its deepest condolences to the families and friends of the 3 drowning victims who lost their lives in the recent flash floods in the northwest. Further notes that a primary school boy was amongst the victims who drowned whilst trying to cross a stream near Mahobistad village, and that the other 2 victims were in a vehicle that was swept away by torrential flooding. 3, further acknowledges that the floods affected wide areas within the Northwest Province, leaving many people without adequate shelter. Finally, calls on government to urgently intervene in this regard in order to bring much-needed comfort and support to the families of the deceased and disaster relief aid to the rest of the people in the affected areas. I so move.
Thank you. Any objection to the motion? No objection, agreed to. NFP?
Thank you. On behalf of the National Freedom Party, I move without notice that this House notes that 4 members of the Mzila family living in Umlazi, namely Mrs. Bongile Mzila, Mrs. Etulele Mzila, Ms. Lengwe Mzila, and Mr. Lungisani Mzila were brutally murdered in the early hours of Saturday morning, 25 February 2017. And further notes that 8 people were also shot at a tavern by the same armed suspects prior to the murders taking place. And also notes that the police who responded to a call from community members shot dead one of the perpetrators while he was trying to escape after raping the youngest of the Mzila daughters and leaving her physically and emotionally brutalized and traumatized. And finally notes that 2 other accomplices are still at large, and members of the community have come forward to identify at least one of the perpetrators. Wherefore, we call upon this honorable House to express its condolences with and to the Mzila family who lost loved ones in this brutal and senseless act of murder, and commend the community members of Umlazi who swiftly came to the assistance of the police in identifying one of the suspects, and also call on the South African police services to intensify their efforts in bringing the perpetrators of this heinous killing and robbing spree to face the might of the law. I so move.
Thank you. Any objection to the motion? No objection, agreed to. Just a reminder, I've been giving extra seconds to everybody. It's 1.5 minutes. Please check your time. ANC?
Thank you, Chairperson. The African National Congress moved without notice that the House notes that A.B. de Villiers became the fastest man to score 9,000 one-day international runs as he led his side to a 159-run victory over New Zealand in the 3rd one-day international at Westpac Stadium in Wellington, New Zealand on Saturday, 25th of February. Further notes that de Villiers scored 85, having needed just 5 runs to surpass former Indian captain Sourav Ganguly, who took 2 to 8 innings to achieve the milestones. Recalls that de Villiers did it in his 205th innings, understands that South Africa scored a credible 2,718 in their 50 overs, and then their pace bowlers ripped the top off the hosts' batting to reduce them to 58 for 6 in the 20th over before bowling them out for 112 in 32.2 overs. Acknowledges that the victory gave de Villiers' team a 2-1 lead in the 5-match series with the 4th game in Hamilton on Wednesday. Further acknowledges that de Villiers had again held his side innings together with a composed knock and was only dismissed in the final over when he failed to get underneath a Trent bowled full toss and was caught on the boundary, and congratulates the skipper, A.B. de Villiers, on reaching this wonderful landmark in cricket, and congratulates the entire cricket team for such a splendid victory against New Zealand. So I so move.
Thank you. Any objection? No objection, agreed to. UDM?
I move without notice on behalf of the United Democratic Movement that the House notes with sadness that on Friday, the 24th of February, 3 primary school girls who were best friends and neighbors were found dead in a trench prepared for water pipes in Tatakwa Payne Farms village. Further notes that Ese Tumadondile, 10 years, was in grade 4, and Lindobuhle Singata, also 10 years of age, was in grade 6, and Dalubuhle, or in the Dalubuhle Junior Secondary School. Also, Sina Zombeshu, 11 years, was in grade 5 at Upper Zimbabwe Junior Secondary School. Recalls that in 2014, these 3 girls were raped by a 42-year-old man who was said to have psychiatric ailments and sentenced to life imprisonment. Commend the village traditional leader, Bishop Vuisile Plagis, for assisting the families to discover the bodies of their children, and further commend the police driver who heard about the incident over the police radio and rushed to the scene to help. Calls for the local authorities to investigate the cause of the incident and express our condolences with the members of the three families and the schools who lost their loved ones at a very tender age. I so move.
Thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? No objection, agreed to. FF plus? Any GA?
I hereby move on behalf of the Democratic Alliance that this House notes that the South African produced 2 new world champions at the recent World Sheep Shearing and Wool Handling Championships, which was held in New Zealand. Also notes that Mayaziki Zweni and Bagani Joel achieved massive victories over the rivals at the competition and kept the South African flag flying high. Acknowledges that the 44-year-old Zweni from Sterkspruit won the Southland All Nations and the World Championships title in the blade shearing division. Also acknowledges that the 50-year-old Joel from Sterkspruit was 4th in the same 2 competitions. Further acknowledges that the pair then teamed up and as a duo won the global title in the blade shearing division against 31 teams from 31 nations. Congratulates this duo on their remarkable achievement and wishes them well in their future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. Any objection? No objection, agreed to. EFF?
I rise on behalf of the EFF to move without notice that the House knows that yesterday, the 27th of February, marked 39 years since the death, that colossal figure of our liberation struggle, Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe, the founding president of the PAC and a former member of the ANC Youth League generation, that redefined the nature of our struggle. Further notes that Sobukwe, always believing that leaders must lead from the front and that leaders should never expect ordinary people to do what leaders themselves were not prepared to do. He got arrested for leading anti-pass campaign from the front, acknowledges that the white minority regime at the time was so terrified of him that Parliament passed a special amendment to the law, the so-called Sobukwe Clause, to keep him in jail indefinitely. Further acknowledges that despite these tough conditions of his life, Sobukwe never once betrayed the cause which he had dedicated his life. When he was released and bent to Kimberley, he continued to dedicate his life to the people, often representing poor people in Kimberley for free in court. Further notes that many attempts have been made by many and now in past to erase Sobukwe's contribution to our liberation struggle. But his ideas about land constituting the cardinal pillar of decolonization will stay with us forever. Calls for the recognition of the Sobukwe played and passing our greatest appreciation to his still living widow, Mam Zodwa Sobukwe, Amanda Sobukwe. I so move.
Thank you. Any objection? No objections, agreed to. ANC?
The ANC moves without notice that the House welcomes the appointment of Advocate Jeremiah Mirabe and Mr. Duncan Hindle to the vacant positions in the Umalusi Council on Wednesday, the 22nd of February 2017. Believes that both Advocate Mirabe and Mr. Hindle bring a wealth of experience and vast knowledge and experience to the Council, having served for many years and in different levels within the education sector. Understands that Advocate Mirabe has served as Director, Legal and Auxiliary Services for more than 8 years at the Free State Department of Education. Further understands that Mr. Duncan Hindle's impressive work history spans more than 40 years in the public sector and had previously served for 5 years as the Director General in the Department of Basic Education. Believes that given their vast experience, the two appointees will definitely bring a whole new dimension to the discussion at council meetings and add significant value by enriching the fiduciary work of the council, and congratulates Advocate Mirabe and Mr. Duncan Hindle on their recent appointment. I so move.
Thank you. Any objection? No objections. Agreed to. Co. Ga go motho. Ra leboga. ACGP. Abateng. ANC.
The African National Congress moves without notice that the House notes with sadness the death of 10 people who were killed when a minibus taxi and a truck collided head-on the old Middleburg Road heading towards Witberg near Middleburg in Mpumalanga on Sunday, 26 February 2017. Further notes that 10 people were found inside the taxi with fatal injuries. Understand that a 22-year-old woman was found in the front of the taxi with serious injuries, and she was the only survivor in the taxi. Further understand that the driver of the truck sustained minor injuries and was treated on the scene before being transported to the nearest hospital. Calls for local authorities to investigate the cause of the accident and conveys its condolences to the family of the deceased and wishes the survivor of the accident a speedy recovery. We so move.
Thank you. Any objection? None. The motion is carried. AIC. Oh. Ahang. ANC.
Thank you, House Chairperson. The ANC wishes to move without notice that the House knows that the airport company, South Africa, AXA, has been ranked amongst the 10 most punctual airports in the world. Further knows that the list was revealed by the OAG Aviation Worldwide, a UK-based agency which monitors on-time performance amongst airlines and airports globally, acknowledges that the OR Tambo International Airport achieved 8th place in the large airports category. Cape Town International Airport is ranked 6th in the medium airport category, whilst Kinshasa International Airport is ranked 10th in the small airport category. Believes that the airport company South Africa's achievement, amongst others, is attributed to its world-class state-of-the-art Airport Management Center, which is the nerve center of the airport's operations, and congratulates AXA on their latest achievement. I so move.
Any objection to the motion? No objection. Agreed to. APC? Pass. PAC?
Thanks, Honorable Chair. I rise on behalf of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania to move without notice that the House notes the level of violence in Tswane against our fellow African brothers and sisters is rising on a daily basis, and our lip services is evidently not enough to the situation. Further note, as a nation, we have a political obligation to return the favor to our fellow African brothers and sisters who, during our dark days, housed first and trained us at their cost so that we come back home and fight the apartheid forces. We further note that we are calling on the security forces of the Republic to put more iron in the fist when dealing with the perpetrators of these barbaric acts that are anti-Africanism. And as leadership, we must be seen to be publicly condemning these acts and play our part in ensuring that our people understand that Africa is for Africans, and these borders were part of colonizing us as the African people. I so move.
Honorable Mbinda, unfortunately, I can't put the question because that motion was not circulated. There are processes on how we deal with motions without notice. Thank you very much. GA?
Thank you, House Chair. I hereby move on behalf of the Democratic Alliance that this House notes that towards the end of 2016, Blue Flags Awards were presented to beaches in KwaZulu-Natal at a function in Southern Broom of the south coast of KZN. Also notes that the Minister of Tourism and the CEO of WESA, Dr. Tommy Baker, presented the awards. Further notes that eThekwini municipality was awarded full blue flag status for Ushaga and Westbrook beaches. Further notes that 6 pilot blue flags were awarded to Umgababa, Amanzimtoti, Brighton, Umhlanga Main, Umdloti Main, and Umdloti tidal pool beaches. Acknowledges that there are 49 countries in the world who belong to the Blue Flag program and that there are 4,250 Blue Flag sites globally. We have been part of the Blue Flag program in South Africa for 16 years, and South Beach in Durban was our first Blue Flag beach. Also acknowledges that the awarding of Blue Flag status to beaches in South Africa play a major role in attracting both the domestic and foreign tourists to our shores, which is vital for the job creation for the lost generation. Pay tribute to our Councillor Geoff Pullman, a long-time Blue Flag champion in eThekwini municipality, who has relentlessly pursued the goal of Blue Flag status, despite the opposition of the previous city manager, Mike Sutcliffe, who advocated for brown flag status for the beaches in eThekwini. Encourages the ministers of culture and tourism to extend further funding for this vital program in the interest of showcasing our beaches and promoting job creation in the tourism industry. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was the longest in the seconds that I've been granting, but I grant it. Any objection to the motion? No objection, agreed to. ANC?
The African National Congress moves without notice that the House knows that ESCOM has been awarded the 2017 Technology Transfer Award by US-based Electric Power Research Institute in Pretoria. Further knows that this prestigious award is in recognition of research the power firm conducted in shaping the future of electricity. Believes that this award testifies to the groundbreaking research conducted by ESCOM's research and development team, which continues to create unique opportunities for the future of electricity. Acknowledges that the entity has prioritized research activities under the ESCOM Power Plant Engineering Institute program, which has produced over 100 graduates at master's, science, and PhD level since its inception in 2012. Understands that each year, Electric Power Research Institute Award recognizes industry leaders and innovators as the vanguard of adopting new technology and spearheading the application of research findings, and congratulates ESCOM on receiving this prestigious technology award. We so move.
Thank you. Any objection to the motion? No objections, agreed to. Order, honorable members, that concludes motions without notice. The next item on the order paper is the member statements. Does any member of the ANC wish to make a statement? I'll start here. I will note you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairperson, the ANC congratulates the Free State Province for having set a new national record with their matric results and reclaiming its #1 spot, which it held 3 years ago. It set a new national record of 93.2% pass rate in 2016. The Free State was the only province that broke the 90% threshold. It achieved an increase of 5.5% from the 87.7% the province achieved in 2015. Quoting Dikgang Matamane, the provincial chairperson of COSAS in the Free State, where he stated, and I quote, "We are impressed with the strides made by some of the schools and learners drawn from the previously disadvantaged schools who continue to do better in critical learning areas such as maths, physical science and accounting in spite of their severe challenges of geographical locations such as the rural areas. I thank you.
Thank you. DA?
Thank you, Chairperson. Gauteng Community Safety MEC Sizakele Nkosi Malobane has certainly turned the ANC's depraved flirtation with criminals and convicts into a finger-licking love affair as she dished out KFC at Leeuwkop prison recently. According to the MEC herself, many of the more than 900 inmates who lined up for their Streetwise 2 have been convicted of raping women and children. In the face of public criticism, the MEC shamelessly retorted, "It's only 2 pieces of KFC, really." Yes, really, it is 2 pieces of KFC that most South Africans and most victims of heinous crimes like rape cannot afford and are unlikely to ever enjoy. The 32 Rand price tag per head may seem insignificant to the MEC, but that is more than 10% than the monthly child grant, and a child grant recipient must stretch that out over 12 days. You can't even buy 2 pieces of KFC with the 20 Rand child grant increase announced by the Finance Minister last week. Rehabilitation and reintegration programs are important and necessary, but these noble aims are not achieved by showering convicts with gifts. Instead, the inmates should have prepared lunch for the visiting stakeholders, a service itself disrupted by the MEC's visit, truly giving back to the community in a cost-effective manner. Unfortunately, the ANC cares more about KFC for comrades, cronies and convicts than the plight of the most vulnerable in society and the survivors and victims of crime. Thank you.
Thank you. EFF? EFF? Oh.
Thank you, House Chair. Government's lack of empathy and complete disregard for the well-being of others is what has come to characterize the ANC government in the Northern Cape under the leadership of Sylvia Lucas. The R31 road, which links Kuruman and the city, has been closed due to heavy storms. There's a sinkhole not far from the road, which prevents the road users from driving into the road. Since January, the road has been closed. With no formal communication to road users, taxi owners and business communities of Daniel Scale, Finch, PPC Lime and Kuruman. Taxi owners and other road users are affected severely because they have to travel via Postmansburg to get to Kimberley and back. This is about 150 kilometers more than the usual distance. Government is silent about the road closure whilst our community continues to incur additional costs. This has not only affected business, but poor people of these areas who are unable to fund their trips to get to the city for many other reasons, including accessing tertiary hospitals and better healthcare institutions. We call on the Minister of Transport, who is also from that province, to intervene and make sure there's a detour road between the road of Daniel Scale and Kuruman. Thank you.
Thank you. ANC, Honorable Korenhoff.
Thank you, Chairperson. The ANC welcomes the creation of over 30,000 jobs that have been created by the Business Process Services Incentive Scheme since its inception. The objective of this scheme is to create employment opportunities, particularly for the young people of South Africa, through the servicing offshore activities. 43 companies have been supported by the Department of Trade and Industry through this incentive. About 86% of the jobs are for the youth. Conduent, formerly Xerox, one of the largest business process services companies in the world, was funded by the DTI for more than 10 million in a project that will create 1,600 jobs over the next 5 years. Recently, the Portfolio Committee visited their offices to assess how the funds that the department allocates are making an impact on how the incentives are applied. The services industry, which has been identified by the government through IPAP as one of the country's key job drivers, has been growing at an average rate of 26%. Thailand employs 1.5 million agents in this industry. We only 30,000. But there's an appetite for South Africa. Many companies want to relocate to South Africa. We can create a massive service industry and create more jobs. Let's do it.
Thank you. IFP.
Ngiyathokoza Sihlalo. This morning, Scopa was supposed to receive a briefing from the Minister of Social Development and the CEO of SASSA. None of them were to be found. The CEO is on a suspicious sick leave. Now, SASSA is now yet again pursuing to enter into a contract with the bunch of crooks that CPS is. As we all know that through their illegal deductions, they have become agents of thievery, stealing from the poor. We are now 30 days before the end of the deadline, and there is no plan on how the social grants will be paid out effective on the 1st of April. The Concord found that the CPS contract was invalid, and now through some sneaky backdoor tactics and a default legal technicality, CPS is being brought back with a negotiation which is set to start tomorrow. The minister is conspicuous by her absence in dealing with this matter, but actively visible in campaigning in the ANC. We are teetering on the brink of a crisis, and in all of this is the press of the poor, who are faced with uncertainty and who are found wanting in the absence of leadership. It is now more clear than ever before that this country began its journey to the grave in 2007 at Polokwane. There is an absence of leadership, and the minister is failing the recipients of grants on a daily basis because there is a footsie-footsie relationship between social development and the crooks which are in CPS who are stealing the social grants of our people, and there are no solutions from this government.
Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you very much. FF Plus.
Chairperson, the second half of the 19th century in Southern Africa was characterized by and dominated by British colonialism.
In the name of the Honorable Shavambu has been printed on the order paper. I now put the motion. Are there any objections? There are objections. I will put the question. Those in favor will say aye, and those against will say no. I think the noes have it.
Between the British Empire
The
and the
chairperson, we're calling for division.
A division having been called, the bells will be rung for 5 minutes.
between the British Empire and the Afrikaner Boer burgers of the Suid-Afrikaanse Republic. Yesterday, it was exactly 136 years since the Battle of Majuba, in which the British were convincingly defeated by the Boers. 27 February 1881, the British were convincingly defeated. British General Colley occupied the Majuba mountain as part of his campaign to attack the Suid-Afrikaanse Republic and annex it for Britain. The Boers, under the leadership of General Piet Joubert and Nicolas Smith, convincingly defeated the British. The British General Colley died during this battle. This war is the only war that the British had lost in the 19th century and to date. They also lost all 4 battles in that war. The Freedom Fund Plus would like to honor these Boers who were prepared to sacrifice their lives in the fight against British imperialism. I thank you.
Thank you. ANC, Honorable Williams.
Williams.
Honorable Rancho, I just saw hands there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson. The African National Congress strongly condemns the
Member in the
recent
voting session is the
xenophobic
voting,
violence in
and
which
when requested to do so,
foreign nationals and
your
properties
button
have been
pressed will be recorded as the members vote when the voting session is closed.
12 houses believed
The question before the House is that the motion as moved by the Honorable N.F. Shavambu be agreed to. Are all members in their allocated seats?
in some of these communities
Voting will now commence. Those in favor of the motion should press the yes button.
simmering tensions that have been reported in other areas,
Those against should press the no button.
speech and threatening messages via
And those wishing to abstain should press the abstain button.
xenophobic utterances of the
Have
city
all members voted?
of Johannesburg, DA Mayor
The voting session is now
Manu
closed.
We urge all South Africans to fight against xenophobia wherever and whenever it manifests itself, and for law enforcement officers to continue with the fight against crime to further promote peace in communities in South Africa. In the same manner that we fought against racism, sexism, and all forms of discrimination,
Honourable members,
we must
the
fight
outcome of the
against
division is as
xenophobia to
follows.
promote
Order, honourable members.
global concept of
The
migration.
outcome of the division is as follows. Those in favour 33, those against 261. There are 2 abstentions, and the motion is therefore not agreed to. Honourable members,
Thank you.
Order. Order, honorable members. Honorable members, on Tuesday, the 21st.
We remember Sobukwe. Born on the 5th December 1924, Robert Mangal.
Scheduled by the program of Honorable Speaker.
Finance there.
In October 20, referred the bill 79. Is a new
Actions of South
Africa. Table here today, this trade organization developing
members support in the activity to review the situation. Use of
landscape.
Thank you, Triton, sir. Agreement on the protocol.
International, the portfolio can speak up by approval of the.
Thank you. Have the benefit of the.
They agree with us. The matter really, all of us today in South Africa, take an oath of being people all to the hand in an accepting state on behalf of the right. Thank you very much.
And humanity for God.
Object. Honorable members, I've been informed that the Honorable J.S. Malema will take charge of the motion in terms of Assembly Rule 93. The Honorable Malema.
Socialist democracy and the projection of the African personality.
Because the should people who owe primacy for 94. Members,
secondary school,
private individuals, we must be loyal to the land that belongs to us. Majority of our people say South Africa belongs to them, yet they do not have proof to show that indeed South Africa belongs to them, because many of them do not even know how a title deed looks like. Many generations died without even knowing how a title deed looks like. It is only through the expropriation of land without compensation that our people will be the rightful owners of this country. We cannot keep on saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, yet we have nothing to show. Today, the ANC should come with the EFF. There is 6% available. We give it to you without no condition to amend the constitution and take the land. If you don't agree with us today, it means you are disagreeing with Honorable Ayanda Dlodlo. If we don't agree with us today, it means you don't agree with your outgoing president on the issue of expropriation of land without compensation, even the minister of land. This is a matter that can unite black people. This is a matter that all of us should stand together and isolate white monopoly capital. This is a matter that can say to us, this is a genuine call which we as black people can identify with. So the ANC, 6% Shiona, Relefayona, Arjen Lefase, Reliming, Arjen Lefase Rage di Feme, Arjen Lefase Refebat Barna Babele Magae, Babele Eple, Babele Ep. This, it means you don't think to show. Today they show how a title deed looks like. How a title, the issue of the land should be an issue of commitment. Honorable members, we have taken an oath here. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying we are loyal to the land. But how can we be loyal to the land which is in the hands of land which is a campaigning issue? The issue of the land cannot be a rhetorical question. The issue of the land should be of the land.
On skills development,
we remain as we were even before 1994. So we are saying that black people, all of us, we need to unite and amend the constitution so that we can expropriate. We remain as we were even before 1994. So we are saying that black people, all of us, we need to unite and those who were oppressing us have not lost anything after the revolution. We remain as we were even before 1994. So we are saying that
of the candidates that sat to examination in November 2015 passed.
So we are.
The situation is even worse in the case of the National Certificate Vocational. Only 10% of our public TVET colleges achieved a pass rate
we are saying
of more
that
than 60%. And 28% of our public
so
colleges, less than 1/3 of the candidates that sat for the examinations passed. We have a growing demand for young, skilled South Africans. Minister Nzimande should act decisively to rescue
We
our
are
public
saying-
colleges and, more importantly, our lost generation. I thank you.
Thank you. Order, honorable members. Tohwana indoniyenza kwaikaris. Please, Ngiyanbawa.
So we ask
EFF.
The Economic Freedom Fighters is seriously concerned about the looming crisis brought about by the shocking...
We are
incompetence
saying
of the
that
South
black
African
people,
Social
all of
Security
us,
Agency
we need
and
to
the political
unite
leadership
and
of
amend the
Mr.
constitution so that we can expropriate land without compensation. There is no white person who will understand that clarion call because they don't know the pain of being landless. Only those who have gone through a passage of being landless will appreciate where we come from on the issue of the land. The issue of the land cannot be a campaigning issue. The issue of the land cannot be a rhetorical question. The issue of the land should be an issue of commitment. Honorable members, we have taken an oath here. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying we are loyal to the land. But how can we be loyal to the land which is in the hands of private individuals? We must be loyal to the land that belongs to us. Majority of our people say South Africa belongs to them, yet they do not have proof to show that indeed South Africa belongs to them, because many of them do not even know how a title deed looks like. Many generations died.
SASSA were adamant that SASSA would be ready.
Many land which is and cannot without owns the
Dlamini through her
and to
political
be
weight around to ensure that the contract
monopoly.
will be given to CPS, however
People all
it may be.
Thank you, honorable
supremacy for as long as land is not returned into the hands of the people. We are the only country where we say revolution has taken place, yet those who were oppressing us have not lost anything after the revolution. We remain as we were even before 1994. So we are saying that black people, all of us, we need to unite and amend the constitution so that we can expropriate land without compensation. There is no white person who will understand that clarion call because they don't know the pain of being landless. Only those who have gone through a passage of being landless will appreciate where we come from on the issue of the land. The issue of the land cannot be a campaigning issue. The issue of the land cannot be a rhetorical question. The issue of the land should be an issue of commitment. Honorable members, we have taken an oath here. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying we are loyal to the land. But how can we be loyal to the land which is in the hands of private individuals? We must be loyal to the land that belongs to us. Majority of our people say South Africa belongs to them, yet they do not have proof to show that indeed South Africa belongs to them, because many of them do not even know how a title deed looks like. Many generations died without even knowing how a title deed looks like. It is only through the expropriation of land without compensation that our people will be the rightful owners of this country. We cannot keep on saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, yet we have nothing to show. Today, the ANC should come with the EFF. There is 6% available. We give it to you without no condition to amend the constitution and take the land. If you don't agree with us today, it means you are disagreeing with Honorable Ayanda Dlodlo. If we don't agree with us today, it means you don't agree with your outgoing president on the issue of expropriation of land without compensation, even the minister of land. This is a matter that can unite black people. This is a matter that all of us should stand together and isolate white monopoly capital. This is a matter that can say to us, this is a genuine call which we as black people can identify with. So the ANC the minister, they, the ANC, should come with generations land. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying the issue of the land should be an issue of commitment. Honorable members who have taken an oath here.
Dynamic and inclusive economy. It envisages a South Africa where rural communities have better opportunities to participate fully in the economy, in the economic, social, and political life of the country. The ANC welcomes the recent launch of the EV Liloboya textile on Thursday, the 23rd February
Honorable Member
in Rosebank by the Minister in the Presidency for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Minister Jeff Radebe. This is a very important milestone in efforts to transform.
Honorable members who have taken an oath here. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying we are loyal to the land. But how can we be loyal to the land which is in the hands of private individuals? We must be loyal to the land that belongs to us. Majority of our people say South Africa belongs to them, yet they do not have proof to show that indeed South Africa belongs to them, because many of them do not even know how a title deed looks like. Many generations died without even knowing how a title deed looks like. It is only through the expropriation of land without compensation that our people will be the rightful owners of this country. We cannot keep on saying